before we record every single week, we've gotten in the habit of doing what John likes to call pre-flight, which is reasonable. And we'll quickly walk through, what we're going to talk about and where we think we're going to stop follow-up and start topics and end topics and do askatp and so on and so forth. And we went the entire way through pre-flight, and I felt like we had it pretty well sorted. I think John felt like we had it pretty well sorted. Then Marco looked at us, Puss in Boots style, with his hat in his hands and his big eyes looking up, and he said, well, what about the Overcast update?
No, I said, I don't want to be too self-serving here, but do we want to talk about the Overcast update? It was suspiciously not mentioned yet.
And why was it not mentioned, Marco?
Because you didn't mention it.
Because you didn't
put it in the friggin' show notes. Good grief. Well, this is the last episode of ATP. We hope everyone's enjoyed the program.
Anyway, that's the point of pre-flight. It functioned, it fulfilled its intended purpose. We made sure we knew how the show was going to go, and Marco brought this up now instead of just springing it on us mid-show and saying, oh, yeah.
By the way, we also didn't mention, now that we're pre-flighting in public, Apple did their external link thing, and then they revised the dating app thing. But they're in such little tiny... Breaking. Yeah, well, and I read it over all of it, and the only thing of note really is that they made the text on the dialogue for the dating apps thing a little bit less horrendously biased. But otherwise, it's mostly stuff that we already knew or stuff that's very unsurprising. But I don't know how much there is to talk about there because, it's just Apple doing their usual jerky stuff around this area, and there's not much different here.
What we could do is we could put things that we want to talk about in a shared document.
That's
and
a good
maybe
idea.
The next time we record, we could potentially look at that shared document and see what we should talk about. All right. We have a lot to get through. We have a mountain of follow-up, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And so I feel like we should just start by trying to conquer it. So first item on the list, resolution independence and Retina. I feel like we have gone 2 to 3 consecutive weeks trying to explain this and apparently failing. So I had a pleasant, if long, exchange with a listener who was not being, belligerent, who was not being mean in any way, which is somewhat rare for the internet. But they just really weren't understanding what the big deal about Retina was. And it's not that they were an unintelligent person. It's just I don't think I was doing a good job describing it. And learning from my mistakes in that regard, I can take a crack at this. But I wonder, John, if it would be best if you took a crack at this, because one of the things I referred this listener to was some old Ars Technica macOS 10 reviews. So would you explain to me, John, for those of us who are not aware, what makes Retina screens and Retina displays so crisp? If it's just 2 times the regular resolution, but it's showing the exact same stuff, why would it look better?
Yeah, a lot of people sent feedback with asking questions and their questions revealed that they had a mistaken notion of how macOS specifically deals with Retina displays. And then some other people had some questions clarifying a point that we didn't really bring up, comparing how Mac does it with Windows, right? So we'll start with the basics. Every time we talk about Retina, we try to describe it as like, there's twice as many pixels. So before, if you're measuring length in one dimension, you'd say what was previously 1 pixel long, now 2 pixels sit in that same place. Or what we would say is on a non-Retina screen, what was previously 1 pixel, now it's a 2x2 grid of 4 pixels, a little square of 4 pixels, right? And we're doing that to express the change in density, right? For the way Apple did Retina displays for the most part is if there had been a pre-existing thing like, say, the 27-inch Thunderbolt display, what they did for their 27-inch Retina display, the Apple Studio display, is it's like the Thunderbolt display, but every place there is a single pixel on the Thunderbolt display, the Retina, the Apple Studio display, has 4 pixels in a little square, right? And so people ask, but why would you want that? If it's just going to draw things with a bunch of little blocks of 2x2 pixels in these 4-pixel squares, why not just draw a single pixel on the Thunderbolt display? What do you get? Who cares if every pixel is made of 4 pixels? It's still the same thing on the screen, isn't it? And the disconnect there is what we're trying to explain is how the density of pixels changed, but macOS does not draw things with 2x2 squares of pixels. It draws things with individual pixels. So if you had like a letter O where the sides of the O are all in a big curve shape, it doesn't make that the curved side of the letter O out of 2x2 blocks of pixels, right? It makes them out of single individual pixels, so it's twice as smooth, around the O. Obviously, you can imagine if you're trying to make a curve out of big blocks, the smaller the blocks, the more the curve looks like a continuous curve and not a stair step, right? So that's the disconnect for that thing. And the second thing to understand on this topic is, how did Apple eventually decide to come upon this solution? Where they took their previous screen, and for every single pixel they made, a 2x2 grid of pixels, and then drew at the higher resolution, right? For many years, we'll put links in the show notes, starting from 2005, then another link in 2007, then another link in 2011. Apple had tried for many years to figure out how is macOS going to draw on higher density displays. macOS 10 was a newish operating system, then came out in 2001. High density displays look like they might be a thing where the pixels would be really, really tiny. You wouldn't want to just continue to draw exactly the way, you had been drawing, because then everything would be really tiny. No one could see it. What you'd want to do is what I described. Keep things more or less the same size. So a 12-point letter O would be the same size as 12-point letter O. It would just be smoother. So how do we go about doing that? One way that Apple tried for years and years and years is that, you'd have the drawing commands that are say, draw letter O at 12-point text, and you'd have the screen, which would have some arbitrary pixel density, and the operating system would figure out, based on the screen density and how big a 12-point letter O is supposed to be, use the right number of pixels, which sounds like a great solution. It's like any screen density, the more pixels you have, the smoother that letter O will be, but this letter O doesn't change size. Like a 12-point letter O is a 12-point letter O is a 12-point letter O, and they would try to keep that consistent. The problem with that is, if you have something that you're trying to draw, like, things in the operating system are defined by how big they're supposed to be, that 12-point letter O or whatever. If that 12-point letter O requires a number of pixels that is odd on one pixel density, but even on the other, it might be offset by a little bit, which doesn't sound like a big deal. But now imagine trying to do things like draw tab bars or toolbars or buttons or things where they have to abut and join exactly. If you can have an arbitrary pixel density, you might end up in a situation where, this dividing line has to be right in the middle, but it can only be in the middle if this is 5 points, because you've got 2 points, then the middle 1 point, and then 2 points. Well, what if it's 6 points? Where's the middle of 6 points? There is no middle. It's got to be closer to one side or the other because of the number of pixels. And so you get what they call pixel cracks and all sorts of other things where, if you try to let the operating system draw at an arbitrary, what we call a scaling factor, it's very difficult to draw things consistently, because you always end up with like 1 pixel extra left over that you have to decide whether it's on the left or the right, and then you can't line things up. So Apple eventually just pretty much gave up. After years and years of having that feature sort of as a debug feature in the operating system, you'll see screenshots in the links where there was actually a resolution scaling slider that you can move around, and you can move it to fractional values like 1.5, 1.25. And then you'd see how just the drawing of everything broke, right? Because nothing expected that, and it's very difficult to get that to join up. So what Apple decided is, we're not going to do that. We are only doing integer scaling factors. So it's either 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x, but it has to be an integer. So that way you always know exactly how to draw anything. You never end up with pixel cracks, because you either one regular non-retina pixel, or a 2x2 grid, double the density or triple the density or quadruple the density or whatever. That's how macOS draws things, as in draws them to the in-memory buffer. The final thing to understand is, okay, so that's how macOS draws stuff. But hey, I can take a 4K monitor and display a 5K. I can set it to 5K. How is it doing that? That doesn't divide evenly. That's not an integer scaling factor. How does that work? Well, the way it works is macOS draws at an integer scaling factor. Like when it draws the screen, it says, here's all the pixels in the screen. It is an integer scaling factor of, it's twice, 3 times. Well, I think only like the iPhones do 3 times, whatever, but it's either 1x or 2x. That's how macOS draws it. And then at the very end, after drawing a 5K image at exactly 2x, right, it scales the entire final drawn image down to 4K. And that's why everything gets all fuzzy. And then it shoves that on the screen. So that's why it's like, why, non-native scaling factors. If it had fractional scaling, you could display 5K, quote unquote, 5K worth of points on a 4K display without any fuzzy scaling, but then you'd have pixel cracks everywhere. But that's not what macOS does. Same thing on the 3X phones, by the way. Maybe Marco remembers the details of this more than I do. But
yep. Well, originally,
yeah. Well,
when the Plus phones launched, the 6 Plus.
Yeah. So they drew everything internally at 3X, but the screens did not have 3 times the number of pixels. So they would draw at 3X and then take the final 3x drawn pixel image and squish it and make everything all blurry and then put that on the screen. But the pixels are so small, people really didn't notice, right?
And that lasted until the iPhone 10.
Yeah, and that's when they could do 3x at, well, not really, because the iPhone 10 didn't use a pentile pattern, which is getting into more complexity of
right.
how pixels are drawn. But anyway, these pieces of information are key to understanding what's different about macOS. And I think Windows tries to do what Apple did, which is arbitrary scaling factors, but I'm not entirely sure. So I'm not going to speak for Windows, but I can say that macOS, if you follow these links and look through the years, they tried the other way to do it and they could not get it to work to be like perfect. And so they said, we're just going to do integer scaling, which I think was the right call because 2x and 3x turn out to be adequate for not seeing the pixels anymore. And it just makes everything so much easier because you never have to worry about that leftover pixel and which side of a thing to allocate it to. You never have to worry about pixel cracks. The price of that is, because of the way macOS works, if you want to display quote unquote 5K worth of stuff, which I know it's not, however many points is horizontally and vertically on Apple's 5K monitor, if you want to display that number of points worth of stuff, it had on a 4K monitor, macOS draws it at 5K. And then it takes the final image and squishes it just like you would squish it in an image editor, and that's why everything looks fuzzy. So you don't get any pixel cracks, but you do get a little bit of blurring. In the same way that you take any image that's pixel perfect and you scale it, everything gets a little bit fuzzy. It gets anti-alias around the edges. So hopefully that will explain to people who are wondering why any of this matters to Mac users. It's a combination of our expectations based on products Apple shipped and also how macOS and iOS and iPadOS and every OS Apple makes decided, back in 2011, basically, how they decided how they're going to draw on high DPI screens. They always draw at an integer scaling factor, and then if necessary, they squish that image down to fit in the number of pixels on the screen. But the way we like it is no squishing. It draws at an integer scaling factor and then just puts those pixels directly on the screen, which has exactly that number of pixels.
Yeah, and I get feedback, including today. I had 2 different pieces of feedback in the span of like 5 minutes from each other on Twitter. Like, hey, what about this monitor? What about this one? And I don't know what I'm being unclear about, but let me try one more time.
I feel this way every single time. What am I being unclear about here?
Like, if your screen is physically 27 inches or bigger, it must be at least 5K, if not bigger. Because how big is the XDR? It's like 30 or something like that? 30 inches?
32, I believe.
32, I think.
So between 24 and 27 inches, you need to be 5K. Much above 27 inches, you're getting into the 6K XDR territory. And if you're 22 to 24 inches, then 4K is sufficient. People are sending me these like 32-inch ultra-wide screens that have the same horizontal resolution. Maybe it's the same vertical. One or the other. One of the dimensions is the same as a like ultra-fine 5K or a Studio Display 5K. And they're like, oh, this would work, right? No, that's way physically bigger and 0 more pixels. What is it? Zaro more boogs or whatever it was, John? I don't remember now. But there's not enough pixels in there. Yeah, it's totally it. There's not enough pixels there. There's just not even close to enough pixels there. And people keep thinking like it's like us with Trump. Like, oh, we got him this time. I got him. And no, it's not even in the ballpark. If it's bigger than 27 inches, it better be more than 5K. If it's bigger than 24 inches, it better be more than 4K. Like, I don't feel like this is unclear, but somehow people just aren't getting it. I don't know. I love all of you, though.
Yeah, and that gets back to the scaling thing, because it's like, oh, why don't you just set your monitor resolution to higher res? Well, then it will be non-native, because then macOS will draw at the higher res and squish that down to fit within the number of pixels are on the screen, and everything will look slightly fuzzy. And then, yes, many people wrote in to tell us, well, yeah, I bet you can't see those pixels. Isn't your vision bad anyway? That's just up to the individual whether they care about native, what we call, non-native display, where the operating system draws at a higher resolution than the number of pixels on the display and then scales the drawn image before pushing it to the display. That looks fuzzy to us. Some people don't notice the fuzz. Again, the old iPhones, when the big iPhones came out, they drew at 3x, but there weren't 3x the number of pixels, so they scaled it. And I bet a lot of people didn't notice because those pixels were really, really small. But on Mac screens, I think a lot of us can still tell.
Yeah, and I mean, even if I can't or John can't or somebody else can't, like whether or not we are being ridiculous, this is something that is important to us. For right or wrong, it's important to us. So if you don't agree, that's fine. That's fine. Just let people like things. All right. Joe Lyon wrote in to tell us about why silicon wafers are round. And Joe writes, the ingot of ingot? I'm probably pronounced that wrong.
Ingo. It's the French pronunciation.
You got it right the first time, ingot.
The ingot of silicon is created as a cylinder as the solid silicon crystal is grown and pulled out of molten silicon, which leads to round wafers. Furthermore, many of the processing steps in the fab to produce the chips on the wafer are based on circular polishing motions and spinning the wafer around its center, which also requires angular symmetry and just wouldn't work well or as efficiently with a non-circular wafer. And then there's a video, I think it was like how do they do that or how it's made or something like that, which we'll put in the show notes. I watched it. The whole thing is like 8-9 minutes, and the good part starts at about just shy of 2 minutes. And we'll put a timestamp link in the show notes. I will note that the source video does seem to have a couple places where it freezes. I was concerned that my Mac was on the fritz, but no. It appears that it's the video itself. But anyways, it does a really good job of explaining all of this stuff. And I definitely think it's worth a watch of all 9 minutes if you have 9 minutes to spare. So check that out.
I love the idea of somebody who would answer that question with, no, I do not have 9 minutes to spare. Meanwhile, they're listening to our show.
Fair. Hey, man, let people spend time how they want, but I agree with you. Moving right along, can you tell us, John, about winning the M1 Ultra lottery, please?
This is from Jonathan Reagan Kelly chiming in about the possibility that was of the theory espoused in that MaxTex video about having to fab two M1 Maxes next to each other in order to make an Ultra. So like you've got the wafer, which as we just established is round, and then you got a bunch of these rectangular chips on it, and they're in a big grid. And there's a little bit of waste around the edges. That's why we asked about the round thing, but apparently there's good reasons for that, as I surmised. And then the theory was, okay, well, if you want to get an Ultra, not only do you have to find two M1 Maxes that have all the parts working if you want to get like an Ultra with all the parts working, but they have to be next to each other on the die. So here's what Jonathan has to say about that. It is almost certainly not the case that neighboring pairs of M1 Max dies are cut out of the wafer to make an M1 Ultra. What they described at launch matches much better onto a more standard technology, which is the class of thing Intel markets as EMIB, which we will link in the show notes, and TSMC markets as LSI, which is local silicon interconnect. That's a standard, widely used available technology, and cheaper and easier to build with better yield, precisely because you don't need directly adjacent dies to be functional to pair them up. You don't need to have fabricated dies next to each other on the same wafer to use this technology at all. The way to think about all these technologies is they're basically circuit boards, just like the human scale printed circuit boards you're used to, just built at different levels of miniaturization with different technologies. And then Jonathan lists a bunch of the different technologies. And so if people know what a circuit board is, it's a big flat board that is mostly non-conductive, but that it has conductive, what we call traces on them. Like you often see it in, if it was an emoji, which it probably is or will be. It's like a green board, but with like gold lines in it. Those gold lines are the conducting paths. So they're kind of like wires, but laid down as these sort of, gold, they're not made of gold usually, but gold things on there that conduct. And circuit boards can have multiple layers. So you see the little gold lines that are on top, but sometimes they have multiple layers where there are other gold lines sandwiched in between, connecting point A to point B to point C, all at different levels, right? So that's what it means by circuit board. And these things, these interposer type things, they are just like circuit boards, but way, 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 way smaller. So here are the different technologies you can do this. One is multi-chip modules like AMD uses for its CPUs to do the integration of multiple dies with the quote-unquote circuit board organic substrate in package, using traditional package-to-die connections along the edges of the dies. This is also what Apple uses for its integrated memory. It's just standard package-level interconnect that cell phones and some laptop chips use. No special 3D stacking going on. So that's if you see all like the RAM chips that are around, like the M1 Ultra, they're just connected with this, like a multi-chip module. There is traditional silicon interposers do the circuit board as a 3D stacked big slab of silicon all the way under the entire array of chips with through silicon vias, TSVs, to connect the chips to the interposer. So this is like a thing that's just underneath the whole chip and has these little tunnels that go through it to reach up to the chip. And then finally, the newer EMIB-like things are like the full interposer, where the circuit board is again silicon and connected with high-density TSVs, but where you only put a very small interposer under the adjacent edges of the pair of dies for point-to-point connections. This is very clearly what the M1 Ultra uses based on everything Johnny Cerrugi said, and is the most sensible balance of cost and performance. So rather than being an interposer that goes underneath the whole chip, as we saw in the video, it's just a little strip between the two that connects them. So if you think of that interposer as like a really, really tiny microscale circuit board with all sorts of little traces and things happening in it, that's how they're connected. And to do that, you do not need them to be next to each other on the silicon wafer. So I found this pretty compelling evidence that they don't need to be next to each other. Now I'm angry again about the price of the M1 Ultra, I suppose.
Well, but if anything, this means obviously that yields would be massively higher doing it this way than doing it the way that we initially guessed, which is good in the sense that this method of making giant chips effectively is scalable and is healthy long term, probably. So that I think it's great in the sense that this isn't just some kind of weird one-off they're going to do and then figure out something else for later. This is something that they're going to be able to do for a long time, probably, and this is scalable. When they want to go to, say, 4 of these instead of 2 of these, maybe for a potential future Mac Pro, that becomes much more possible and relatively much more affordable. I know it's, again, the term relatively here, than if you would have had to have like 4 perfect dies all next to each other. Like that would have been ridiculous, where 2 is even, pretty out there. So this is promising in the sense that it's much more reasonable of a technique to use, and it suggests that there will be much higher yields and the ability to do larger scale combinations in the future.
Something we might touch on in a future episode is the other problem of having a bunch of, in this case, a bunch of M1 Maxes, a bunch of JC dies or whatever, connected to each other, doing stuff. It's kind of what we've talked about a little bit in the past of like, it's each one of those chips can act on its own, but now you want them to all act together as one, looking like one big CPU to the operating system. And that can be tricky because each one of those chips does have its own stuff. Right, it's got all its own stuff that is closer to it. Sometimes also, in the case of the M1 Max, it's got its own connections to its own RAM and all that stuff. If you got 4 of them together, now 4 things all have their own stuff, and you want them to cooperate as one. It starts to become important how you allocate. Starts to become even more important, let's say, how you allocate work to those things, because you don't want to give a piece of work to one die and then give it to another die a millisecond later and then give it to another die, because every time you give it to a different die, it left behind all its stuff. It might have left stuff in the cache that was in the one die, and now you put it on another die and it goes to look in the cache and it's not there. So it's a good idea to keep things in the die where they started, because their stuff will be there as they build up their cache or whatever. And you don't want to flush all that stuff out when you change processes. Anyway, this is a very complicated process. They're already doing it within a single chip, obviously. And then within the M1 Ultra, it's an even bigger problem. And if you had 4 of them, it would be an even bigger problem. So we'll see if Apple ever mentions that in a future keynote to emphasize how they've been able to harness these 4 different chips woven together or whatever.
We are brought to you this week by Backblaze, unlimited computer backup for Macs and PCs for just $7 a month. Now, I didn't know there was a World Backup Day, but it turns out today, March 31st, is World Backup Day. So don't be an April Fool. Start backing up your data and tell your friends and family to do the same. Backblaze is the best. This is what I use to back up my data, because I've tried everything out there. I assure you, I've tried every cloud backup solution. Backblaze is the one that I've always gone back to, and it's the one I've used the longest and the one I've been the happiest with, because you back up everything, unlimited space. Even if you have external drives connected to your computer, it'll back those up too. Everything, unlimited, unthrottled, for just $7 a month. You can access it from anywhere, from either their website or their wonderful Android or iOS mobile app. So like if you have a file on your home computer and you're away somewhere, you can just pull it off their app. It's right there in the Backblaze app. If you need to do a large restore, you can either download the files off the website, or they have this great restore by mail function where you can actually have them mail you a flash drive or a hard drive with all your data, and then if you just return that drive when you're done with it, they'll refund you the cost of the drive within 30 days. So it's just fantastic. They even have additional things like for an extra $2 a month, you can increase your retention history to 1 year of version retention. It's just fantastic to be a Backblaze customer. I love cloud backup. It solves so many problems, provides such great reassurance and really a true backup when it's totally offsite, totally out of your office and your building and everything. It's just great. So see for yourself with a 15-day free trial with no credit card required at backblaze.com/ATP. That's backblaze.com/ATP. Go there, play with it, start protecting yourself from potential bad times right now. Backblaze.com/ATP. Thank you so much to Backblaze for sponsoring our show, and happy World Backup Day, apparently.
Phil Stollery writes that the fans in the Mac Studio are not just cooling the chip, they're also cooling the power supply, which needs cooling no matter the load. So this is the context for this is that we were wondering why the fans are really spun up always. And as per Phil, they're cooling the power supply.
Yeah, that's a good theory, except the M1 Mac Mini also has an internal power supply, and it does not make this much noise or run as fans as high. So it is a factor because we were always comparing it like, why would this be making as more noise than the laptop? Well, of course, the laptop doesn't have an internal power supply. It's got that external power brick. It's also true of the iMac. Why is the iMac so silent? Well, the power supply is not inside there either. It's in the external brick. But the M1 Mac Mini has got a fairly beefy, oversized power supply from the Intel version still inside there. And it's basically silent. Obviously, everything is beefier in the Mac Studio than it is in the Mac Mini, but it seems like the math still doesn't quite add up.
Yeah, I mean, also, the iMac Pro had a massive power supply in it, supplying hundreds of watts to all the guts of that machine, and that was silent. So yeah, I don't. It is worth noting certainly that is a factor, but I still don't think. First of all, I still don't think this is the only factor leading to why this machine is so mysteriously loud. And I still think like something here is I possibly wrong. Like that's how weird it is that this machine is, that people are saying this is audible at all, because compared to its peers, that it still seems weird that they've set the fan minimum to be so audible when it seems like it probably shouldn't be necessary.
Yeah, and the Studio Display also has an internal power supply, also has two fans, and is also, according to everyone who's had one, silent.
Yep. And then there was a Twitter thread from Only Me about returning a Mac Studio due to fan noise, and so we'll link the thread in the show notes. This person says, cooling does seem to be overspecified in the Mac Studio, at least with my admittedly light usage. With normal usage, my Mac Studio CPUs are about 35 degrees Celsius. My 16-inch MacBook Pro with M1 Pro is around 45 degrees Celsius with the fan off, according to iStat menus. As an experiment, I taped a piece of paper around the back of the Mac Studio. This seems unwise, but whatever. Covering the back vents.
Don't do this.
But with a little gap between the case and the paper, a bit like a chimney. This reduced the fan noise by about 4 to 5 decibels, which made it audible, but completely acceptable to me. The CPU temps increased by less than 10 degrees Celsius, which is still less than my MacBook Pro with the fan off. And then this person clarifies, actually, I don't think the paper increased the temperature at all. I only did it about 90 minutes ago, and they include a graph. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what to make of this. It seems like maybe this will get fixed in software. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't recommend blocking the vents on your computer, but as a fun experiment that somebody else does, not me, it is interesting that even blocking the vents didn't seem to increase the temperature much. It's just so over-provisioned with cooling, it seems like. There's like nothing you can do to make this thing hot, and yet the fans, they keep spinning.
It is a little suspicious that at this point, now we are a couple of weeks out from release, and I don't think anybody's gotten like a weird statement from Apple PR saying like, oh, we'll tweak the fans in a software update. Like I haven't seen anything like that come by the news people. So maybe this is just how it is. But it just seems so odd to me that they would ship something like this with fan noise that is audible. Because obviously, and we're going to get into this in a second. Like what does audible mean? It's very variable. It depends so much on people and on conditions, but it just seems like a weird misstep. And they've been so good about fan noise with all their other recent models for years, excepting the Intel laptops before, but for all the desktops have been really quiet for a long time, and all of the M1 based computers, including the laptops, have been really like ridiculously, amazingly quiet. And so to have this chip come out, and even the configuration with the M1 Max, the same chip as in the high-end laptops, even that configuration has audible fan noise to a lot of people. And so it seems like something went wrong here. And I have a hard time believing that this is just how they designed it, because they've been so good otherwise.
And then acoustician Andrew Wade, this is someone who is very smart with audio things. Andrew Wade says, acoustician checking in on this fan noise thing with some rules of thumb, since you sound a little unsure of the decibels thing. For noise level differences, according to Andrew, 1 to 2 decibels, the human ear can't hear the difference. 3 decibels, just about noticeable. 5 decibels, clearly noticeable. 10 decibels sounds about twice as loud. So a 25, 26, and 27 decibel fan will sound the same, assuming, of course, one isn't making a weird hum or something. As for quote-unquote audibility, that depends on how loud the room is already that you're in, how close you are to the thing, how old you are. Your hearing, especially at high frequencies, normally fades with age from about 20. So I, as in Casey, would probably be able to hear fans that John can't, coincidentally. I don't know what you're complaining about, John. But anyway, back to Andrew. So is a 25...
Newsflash, I'll tell you why. Because the frequency distribution of fan noise is not mostly in those very upper ranges that you lose, like the teen K hertz kind of range. It's not those ranges that you're hearing. It's broadband noise across many frequencies, including most of the mid-range frequencies that people tend to hear pretty well for a very long time.
Fair enough. So back to Andrew. So is a 25 to 26 decibel fan quiet? In almost all normal circumstances, it's going to be inaudible. Most offices are anything from 30 to 50 decibels. Sitting 1 to 1.5 meters from the studio, you're never going to be able to hear a 25 decibel fan. Quiet recording studios are at about 20 to 25 decibels. So in that highly unusual scenario, you may hear it if you're close to it. Maybe.
Challenge accepted.
Says someone who is professionally trained in this field.
Well, I would say I am not an acoustician. I am a computer nerd. I know a little bit about audio, but not as much as Andrew most likely does, I hope, for somebody with that title. So Andrew probably dramatically outqualifies me on this. So that thing aside, we're clearly hearing from lots of people, hey, subjectively, I'm hearing these fans and they're loud, or they're at least noticeable. Most people are not saying, like, I can't believe how loud it is. Most people are simply saying, it's odd that I'm hearing the fan. Because on all these modern computers, I haven't heard the fan. It's weird I'm hearing it on this one.
But some people also characterize it as silent.
Right. And I'm sitting here, like I measured, I happen to have an SPL meter for reasons. So I measured my office earlier tonight, and my office hovers around 40 decibels at night, which is, right there in the middle of the range Andrew said most offices are. But if my office is 40 decibels, I can hear quiet fans when they're on. So are the measurements wrong? Am I wrong? Am I somehow am I somehow magically hearing? Probably not. My hearing's not that good.
When you have something that is a certain volume, it's not like adding another thing that is lesser volume doesn't count somehow or cancels it out.
Right, that's true.
It just adds to the noise. What he's just saying is if you don't find the noise in your office deafening with nothing turned on, adding something, a noise source at that volume level you're not going to find it super duper offensive, right? And I think Gruber linked to Panzerino's thing or something. I just read something again today from somebody who just offhandedly said, oh, and the great thing is it's absolutely silent. I know it's frustrating to hear us talk about this when none of us have one. The shipment dates of these things are out into May or June. I eventually will have one. I wish I didn't have to wait until May or June, but I did not place my order soon enough, so I'm sorry. But I will eventually have one, and I'll tell you how it is. And I do have the Mac Pro here. Which is probably the previous loudest Mac that Apple makes. So I'll be able to tell you what it's like. But for now, none of us have one, hint, hint, Apple. So we can't actually tell you firsthand, but we're getting lots of different reports. And that's why we're looking at all of these, people doing measurements, people chiming in about what is audible and what is not audible.
Yeah, I went and I saw the Studio Display and the Mac Studio in an Apple store, and I'll be the first to tell you, an Apple store is really loud. I am not denying that, not in any way, shape, or form. But I did pick up the Studio, and this is... I didn't have the presence of mind to stick my ear next to it, but I picked it up.
Someone had to come over to you. Put that down. What are you doing?
Alarms start going off.
Yeah, no, it's not. Did you pick up the Mac Pro? They don't even have a Mac Pro. Never mind.
No, I actually asked if they had an XDR, and they were like, no. Or at least not a display model anyhow. But anyway, I picked it up, and again, I'll be the first to tell you, it was in an Apple store. Apple stores are not quiet. I understand that. But in the context of an Apple store, even with the thing a half a meter away from my head, it was completely silent. Again, I'm in an Apple store, I understand. But I couldn't hear squat. And the way some people are talking is that it's like a freaking... they're saying it's a wind tunnel coming out of this thing.
Yeah, and a bunch of people have sent us, someone tried to do a YouTube video that is supposedly precisely calibrated so that if you play it on your iPhone at maximum iPhone volume, it exactly simulates the decibel level and sound of the Studio. I have to say that there are too many links in that chain for me to believe that is remotely accurate. So although I did try it, I, again, reserve judgment until I get one of these things to my house.
Yeah. If only one of us got a review unit, or all three of us. Imagine that. That would be so convenient. That's all right. Renfred writes, I wanted to point out that Apple actually provides noise measurements for their products on the technical specification pages. Here are a few examples, and you can search for acoustic performance if you want to see exactly where it's listed. And Renfred has done the courtesy of doing the work for us, so I'm going to rattle off some numbers. The Mac Pro, 11 decibels. Mac Studio, 15. MacBook Air, I don't know. MacBook Air, 3. MacBook Pro, 3.
Wait, hold
iMac
on.
Pro.
The MacBook Air doesn't have any moving parts. How? I mean, is it like little like electrical noise?
I mean, maybe 3 decibels is just the atoms vibrating, and
this is suspect. I mean,
these are Apple's official numbers, right? So,
but like the Mac Pro, 11 decibels. Really? That's it? That's all it makes?
Well, so you let him finish the thing, because obviously how you measure sound can vary, like where you put the microphones. Anyway, go on.
All right, so Mac Pro 11, Mac Studio 15, MacBook Air 3, MacBook Pro 3, iMac Pro 13, which splits the difference between the Studio and the Mac Pro. The quote-unquote best laptop ever made, otherwise known as the 2015 MacBook Pro, 6. And so Renfred continues, these results are quite different compared to the Quiet Mac site. We don't know exactly how Apple's measuring these, but they noted a decent number of details, including the fact that they are measuring from, quote, operator position, quote. They compare idle versus wireless web mode, the latter being pretty pointless. I know for a fact that the 2015 MacBook can get much louder than 6 decibels under load, but given that the M1 Max and Mac Pro tend to stay at idle, these numbers should be a pretty good comparison point if they're being measured consistently.
Yeah, you would think Apple has to have some sort of procedure. Like, why would they list this on their spec page? Whatever Apple's procedure is, they must have like a standard of like, here's how you measure the sound of a Mac. Put it in this position where we expect people to use it, put the microphones here, use these microphones in this environment, and measure the sound. I am not an acoustician, but maybe 3 decibels is just like the electrical noise of like the various inverters and stuff that are inside there. Like, is that really, really quiet? Maybe that's like so low that it's below the level of human hearing. Because I'm sure I still experience this even in my old age, but especially when I was younger, you can hear the sound of electronics that have quote unquote no moving parts.
Yeah.
Right. There's no fans. You can, depending on if there's a power supply or a transformer or an inverter, or lots of things can vibrate and make noise that ostensibly aren't supposed to be moving parts. And it can be really bad. Like my Power Mac G5 had a chirping power supply. That power supply wasn't supposed to have any moving parts in it, but it had parts that moved so much they made chirping noises like a bird, right? So it can happen. So that makes me think maybe that's what we're hearing in the MacBook Air.
Maybe, but these numbers are first of all, they're so low that they're suspiciously low, and also relative to each other, they're very odd.
I don't think they're suspiciously low, because if they do operator, like everybody on YouTube who's measuring the sound is sticking a mic like behind the Mac Studio. Like they're literally putting a mic right, like they're micing a drum kit or something. Like they're putting a mic right where the fan outlet is. Whereas Apple says they're doing it from operator position. So operator position is the output is facing away from you. The thing is on the desk. It's like 3 feet away. Huge difference. So I don't find the absolute value suspect at all. The relative values, I don't know. I haven't had enough of these machines to know. Like, again, maybe 3 decibels is just electrical noise. iMac Pro at 13 and Mac Pro at 11. You're right. That's
the thing. Like, relative to each other, it's very strange. And to say, and if the Mac Pro is 11 and then the Mac Studio is 15, like that's again like then the Mac Studio is pretty loud. So
well, see previously about like a 3 decibel difference or 4 decibel difference being just about noticeable. So
I notice a 3 decibel difference. I make 3 decibel adjustments when I'm editing. I know what that sounds like.
So eventually, at the very least, I eventually will get one of these in the distant future, and then when no one cares anymore, I will tell you how it sounds.
All right.
So real-time follow-up from Mr. Jason Snell. All I can say is that I noticed the sound. I wasn't trying to hear it. I noticed it. But it is very quiet, and my office was entirely silent when I noticed. And then some of us just don't really care about fans, and in fact have a clickety-clattering
You've got the Synology in the same room as you, and that thing is so loud. It's the loudest fan-having thing in my house. I don't get the Vibra-Slap, only when Casey says it.
He was
delayed. He was delayed.
Does it sound like a Vibra Slap? Like all the hard drives clicking?
Yep. That's
I'm just backing up the time machine. I'm watching some Plex.
Actually, that's how you know when they're failing.
Yeah, right.
All right, moving right along. That's enough about fan noise for now. Anonymous writes in with regard to cellular and licensing. So the context here is that, what happens if Apple were to release a cellular-equipped MacBook? Which, by the way, Marco, did you see somebody was saying, there was like a brief rumor that somebody was saying, I think, that's coming? Maybe I made that up. I could swear I saw that. But nevertheless.
I mean, that would be nice. I'm not holding my breath.
Neither am I.
I hope so much that they do it. I think cellular might be my last outstanding laptop feature request from Apple. I love everything else about the current laptops. I think they nailed pretty much everything else I want. Besides, I would always appreciate more ports, but I'm very happy with these laptops. I have pretty much no outstanding wish list items except cellular. That's it. That's like the only thing left.
Yeah, I cannot say enough good things about the laptops right now. They are so freaking perfect. But anyway, so we were talking about, would it be a fortune for Apple to add, a cellular modem to one of these devices? And so Anonymous writes, I don't see a discussion about laptops, but at least for phones, Qualcomm caps the dollar royalty as a percentage of a $400 phone. And they quote a thing from Reuters about this because we were saying, we thought that the royalties owed to Qualcomm are a percentage of the cost of the device. So if you have like a $5,000 laptop, that's a lot of money you owe Qualcomm. And so Anonymous is pointing out that, no, at least for phones, it was capped at $400. And there were a couple of links about this. And then what was also interesting, which I'd forgotten, is that Qualcomm collects this is Anonymous again. Qualcomm collects royalties regardless of whether an OEM gets the modem chip from Qualcomm or from someone else. And this is quoted in a court document that we can put in the show notes as well. And the quote from that document is, OEMs are required to pay a per-unit licensing royalty to Qualcomm for its patent portfolios, regardless of which company they choose to source their chips from. Man, that's a racket. I want to get in on that.
That's just how patents work, right? I mean, we don't actually...
Patents are a racket.
Yeah, we don't actually know if there's a patent cross-licensing agreement with either Apple and Qualcomm or with Intel's cellular modem thing that Apple bought, right? Lots of companies... That's why patent cross-licensing agreements exist. Patents are terrible and stupid and shouldn't exist, but they do. And because they do, it's this mutually assured destruction thing where companies have their own portfolios of patents, and then they sort of enter these agreements where they say, we won't annihilate you with our patents as long as you promise not to annihilate us with your patents. And they enter a cross-licensing agreement that says, we let you use your patents as long as we can, we let you use our patents as long as we can use your patents. And then we agree not to sue each other. And that's the only way anything gets done sometimes, because patents are so dumb and so many companies have them. But yeah, I'm sure, everything is patent encumbered. Everything that's in, if you look at all the patents that apply to, the M1 chips, I'm sure there's tons of patents in there that Apple doesn't own, they have to pay somebody for. And Apple is making its own cell modems, and I'm sure there are patents in those cell modems that Apple has to pay for. I just don't know if there is an existing cross-licensing agreement between Apple and Qualcomm or the ex-Intel cellular company, Qualcomm or whatever.
Yeah, patents are great. You should do a podcast episode about that sometime, John.
Yeah.
We are brought to you this week by Remote. Do you employ or pay workers in other countries? Even if you don't yet, you probably will soon. Now that remote work is the norm, employees have more freedom than ever to move around. So if you want to keep your best people, you have to stay flexible. And this is why Remote makes it easy for companies of all sizes to employ global teams. They take care of international payroll, benefits, taxes, and local compliance, so you can focus less on paperwork and more on growing your business. Remote helps you onboard full-time employees or contractors in countries all over the world in minutes on its simple, easy-to-use platform. And even better, Remote lets you rest easy by providing the most comprehensive intellectual property protections and data security in the industry. They own full local legal entities in all their covered countries, guaranteeing you never have to deal with a third party ever. And to save you money, Remote never charges any fees or salary percentages. You get access to everything Remote offers, from payroll to compliance to benefits management, for one low flat rate. No hidden fees, no surprises ever. Just the best global employment solution in the business. And our listeners, you can get an even bigger discount. You can get 50% off Remote's full suite of global employment solutions for your first employee for 3 months. Just visit remote.com/ATP and use promo code ATP. So see why top global companies like GitLab trust Remote to manage and pay their international teams. Whether you want to hire one person or 100, Remote makes it easy. Visit remote.com/ATP and use promo code ATP to get started. Thank you so much to Remote for sponsoring our show.
deep cuts. This was when we were talking about open source and funding open source and how so many companies specifically, are kind of riding on the coattails of open source. And I brought up Discourse, which had put up a blog post, if I recall correctly, saying, "Oh, look at us, we fund open source." And they gave tens of thousands of dollars to different open source projects. And at first I was like, "Oh, that's great." And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, tens of thousands of dollars, really? That's it? Well, I got an email from Jeff Atwood, who is one of the co-founders of Discourse, if I'm not mistaken. And Jeff writes, "As far as open source goes, our primary contribution is the Discourse code and almost all of its plugins. One of our core values is to be 100% open source, now and forever. So far, so good. We've been a self-sustaining, profitable, fully remote, no headquarters open source company since 2012, almost a decade now. We host 100 plus forums for open source projects free of charge as part of our free hosting programs," which I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And then Jeff continues, "We also contribute hundreds of hours of upstream fixes to the open source that we rely on and pay other open source projects for work and or subscriptions whenever we can. For example, until we built a native chat feature in Discourse, which is currently in early beta, we paid for a yearly enterprise subscription to Mattermost, an open source web chat solution." So that's my kind of stuff. That's the spirit I like to see.
Yeah, and Jeff Atwood, I mean, so those of you who don't know, obviously forever ago he's been known as his blog Coding Horror, but also he was one of the founders of Stack Overflow. And I'm pretty sure the reason why Stack Overflow had, since the beginning, it had that thing where its content is all released under like an open license of some sort. I forget the details, but like all the content on Stack Overflow that everyone's writing is freely available for other people to redistribute under certain terms. And I'm pretty sure that's because of Jeff. I think he was the one who championed that early on, because he has always been pretty strong about this kind of open source stuff. So yeah, I respect him a lot, and that sounds all right to me.
Yeah, and open source companies are like if you are a company that's trying to make money from open source, again, the old discussion, how can you make money? You give people the source code. Well, they pay for support and, they sometimes pay for hosting and pay for all this other stuff. But anyway, if you are an open source company and you're doing that, it behooves you to also help support other companies that do the same thing, because it doesn't help you if you are the only company in the entire world that does open source stuff and every other one goes out of business. So if you are using some other open source component in your open source, throw some of your money their way, right? So just, try to make it an actual ecosystem that is self-sustaining, because you can't sort of be, I get all the free stuff from everybody, but I give nothing back. Especially if you're going to be an open source company, you really have to sort of give and take.
Indeed. And then speaking of that, there was a really good blog post that was pointed out to us. This blog post is by Filippo Valsorda, and it discusses how to pay professional maintainers. So people who, their job either literally or effectively is to maintain open source projects. And Filippo writes, it's Filippo, isn't it? I'm sorry. They write, "I believe that to successfully fund an open source project, a company needs to pay the maintainers, not people external to the project, pay them real money in the order of what they could make as senior engineers, pay for maintenance, not features, grants, governance, or support, and keep paying them, assess performance at contract renewal time." So basically, in so many words, kind of sort of treat them like a real employee. And I think that's good advice.
Yeah, and this is, what I'm saying, like, people charge for support and stuff like that. This advice is, I agree with, but it's so hard to sell inside the company, because that's why these bullet points are so, shocking. It's like, paying the maintainers versus people external. That's not that shocking. I suggested in the last show of like, don't pay random people to help. There are already people maintaining this. Just pay those people because they already know how to do it. They're already the experts. But then pay for maintenance, not features or governance or support. No one wants to pay for maintenance. No one ever wants to pay for maintenance on anything, on cars, houses, but especially software. If you're going to convince your company to pay for something, like, well, what do we get for the money? They'll add the feature that we want, right? Or, they'll give us commercial support. Like, those are things you can buy as well. But also, someone has to maintain it. There's nothing to give you support on if no one maintains it. And paying for maintenance, everybody hates that, but it's important. And then keep paying them. It's like, can we just pay them once? Like during open source week, we'll give them $1,000, then we don't have to think about it again for a year. That's not sustainable. And the year goes by and maybe that thing, will have some bug in it that destroys your whole company that no one fixes because you never paid anyone to maintain it.
And then tell us about software warfare, John.
This is another, we talked about open source people doing things intentionally because they're cranky about not getting paid enough to maintain their software. This is like literal warfare, as in some people who are, again, good old Node, some people who are authors of a popular Node package intentionally updated it with some malware that wipes your disk if you happen to have a Russian or Belarusian IP address, to sort of punish everyone who is in those countries for the war in Ukraine. If you didn't notice and didn't pin your dependencies and download this thing and it does a GeoIP lookup, it tries to erase your hard drive. And that is an example of absolutely, positively, 100% malicious, intentional, on-purpose damage from an open source thing. And it gets back to the whole argument, whether it's an accidental bug or a malicious thing or someone who's just having a bad day. If this piece of software is super important to your business, and if you care about your business, you have to take some ownership of that by either pinning the dependency to a version that you have vetted, or making sure that you have some kind of business relationship with the people who make the software so that you can have some recourse. Like, for example, if you had a support contract and somebody did that, probably you could sue them and win. But if you have no commercial or relationship with this person whatsoever, when something like this happens, there's not much you can do about it.
Yeah, this is something. I don't even know what to make of this, but it's fascinating what you can do if people are nefarious. So moving right along. Marco, you've been busy.
I have.
So busy you couldn't add anything to the show notes, I see.
Too busy pushing out software.
Right? Yeah. So all kidding aside, congratulations. New Overcast release. Can you walk us through it? What's new? What was good? What was bad? What was ugly? Tell us everything.
I have just released the Overcast 2022.2 update that includes a significant redesign, probably the most significant redesign that I've done in its history, as well as a bunch of features and little tweaks here and there. And this was the result of roughly 5 months of work. It's however long ago Thanksgiving was. It was the week before Thanksgiving that I really started this in earnest. It's been a lot of work, and I think it turned out pretty good. I'm really happy with it. I think this is the first time that I think something that I designed is good looking in an app. I've always had programmer designs before, and I've never thought that what I was releasing was absolute crap at the time I was releasing it. But in retrospect, my design skills were terrible in my early years of making apps and got a little bit better over time. But I think this is the first time I've finally reached the point where I think looking at this current design, most people will not look at this and say, wow, you should really hire a real designer. Some people will, because that's always the case. Even people who have, quote, real designers will have people telling them that. But I'm proud of this in the sense that I think this is something that is nicely designed that I designed. That's not a common thing, not a common feeling I've had in my career so far. So I'm very proud of that. So secondly, from that, I think I'm pushing the design forward in a way that is a little bit more aggressive than I've done. Most of the time my designs have been fairly conservative in the ways they would use system elements, the colors and fonts they would use. It was all fairly conservative. Here again, I think I'm very aggressively pushing into color with this update. I have thicker line weights everywhere as well. I'm using the SF rounded font, and I even customized the numerals so that it has the alternative 4, 6, and 9 glyphs because I thought that it made them look more fun and improve legibility at small sizes. So I've done a lot of that kind of design work of pushing this into what I think looks much more modern than it did before. Because the previous Overcast design, and if you want to see before and after shots, I have this blog post I did on my site, and it shows certain screens side by side, and you can see the difference night and day. If you look at that, it's very clear that the previous design was very much of its era, which was largely unchanged since I launched it, at least in the list screens. The now playing screen has changed a bit over time, but and by the way, this redesign doesn't include the now playing screen or some of the other screens in the app, but I'll get to those next. But the main area of redesign here was the home screen, the thing that lists all your podcasts and playlists, and then a little bit on the episode screens, the playlists themselves or the podcast, but there's more to come on the podcast screen. Anyway, I did a lot here that dramatically looks different than the way the app has looked on like the home screen since basically it launched 8 years ago almost. It launched in the summer of 2014, so this is almost 8 years ago. That was in the era of iOS 7 design. And so the entire app before this, at least the list screens, looked very iOS 7-y. And that's a very dated look now. Now, the rest of the screens in the app, the playlist and podcast screens and the Now Playing screen, I had done incremental revisions to those over the years, but the home screen that lists all your podcasts and playlists, that screen looked so old before. So that's really what I was aiming mostly at, was that home screen. And lots of stuff throughout the app that happened to be affected, like, when I changed the font, that changes everything in the app. I changed the orange for the first time ever. It's now a different orange. It's now actually iOS system orange. The default sequence of colors and most of the colors that are available in the color pickers, those are iOS standard system colors that they introduced, I think 2 or 3 years ago, where iOS basically launched its own, like, here's a nice design palette with colors that all harmonize together, or whatever. Throughout the entire app, I'm using SF symbols instead of my own icons for almost everything. I'm highly customizing some of them. In many cases, I am using multiple SF symbols together, or I'm taking an SF symbols base icon and like badging it in a custom way, or things like that. But for the most part, I'm using SF symbols almost everywhere. All of this, I think, makes the app look and feel much more like a modern app than it did before, where before, in many ways, and especially on that home screen, it just looked so iOS 7-y. In the era of iOS 7, when I designed that home screen, that was fine, but we've moved on quite a bit since then. Other than design, this also introduced a bunch of features, things like a Mark as Played button, a bunch of special playlists. But for the most part, it was mostly about the design. And so I'll get to the reception in a minute. But before I get there, did I cover what you wanted me to cover? Like, what do you think of this?
Can you explain? I know you've gone back and forth on this a lot with Twitter. I know Mark as Played was the number one requested feature since 1.0, and I understand, tons of people want it and everything. But I have to say, I'm in the camp of not understanding the purpose or function of this. Can you tell me what the masses that were demanding a Mark as Played feature, like how they use it and how it functions? Because from my perspective, I'm used to the Overcast defaults as they've always been. When a podcast completes, I have it set to auto delete itself, right? So yeah. Marking as played, but not deleting. I don't understand how that interacts with, like, what were people who wanted Mark as Played? What did they want from Overcast, and what do they now have now that you've added it?
Agreed.
So since the beginning, I'm like you. I let things play until they're done or until close enough, then I fast forward to the end. I have a little behavioral trick I've had in there, I think maybe since 1.0, certainly for a very long time, where if you fast forward 30, and if you hit the end, it ignores any further fast forward commands until you stop fast forwarding for a second or two. That way, if you want to quickly reach the end, you can just slam on fast forward from whatever you're in. If you're in your car, if you're on your headphone clicker, whatever it is, you can just slam fast forward. Just spam click it basically, and then when it reaches the end of the podcast, it won't seek into the next one. Because that's a common thing that I would want to do sometimes, and often I'd be like in a car or something, and I hear the ending theme song begin to something, skip, and then once it stopped skipping, I knew I'd reached the end. Anyway, ever since 1.0, my vision of deletion was I would hit the end in some form, and it would delete, and that would be it. And I never thought, it did track whether something had reached the end, so it was tracking played status since the beginning, but it never had a button that you could make it say it was played. You could delete it, but deleting doesn't mean Mark as Played. It would get rid of it, but it would not show that word played in the description unless you actually played it till the end. And the only way to get it there quickly, like if you saw an episode and listened, you wanted it to be marked as played, you would have to open it up, seek to the end, let it hit the end. You also can't seek to the end by dragging. That's another intentional little behavioral thing. If you drag the slider all the way to the right, it will seek to 10 seconds before the end. Now, you could drag all the way to the right and then hit seek forward. That will hit it right to the end. Anyway, so this is also, these are ways people were doing this who wanted to do this. Now,
but when you say it would be shown as played,
yes.
If it is deleted, or is this for if it was streaming, where would you see the word played displayed on an episode that you no longer have? You notice that you're tracking it, so you can know that they have played it. But if when I go to the end of a show naturally, it gets deleted. Presumably, internally in your database, you mark it as played. How does that manifest? How do I ever see that again?
Progress/played and deleted are two separate values in the database. And the way that manifests itself is if you're looking at like the list of episodes of all episodes of a podcast, like if you go into the podcast screen, you hit the all tab and you see all episodes of that podcast, historically you will see which ones you have actually played and the rest that are dimmed out are just deleted. So the reason why people wanted this is that a lot of times people will selectively play only certain episodes of a podcast, or they will want to go back and replay a podcast, or they will want to, if they come to Overcast from another app, maybe they want to indicate where they are, like where they've listened up to, by marking certain episodes as play that they've already heard. So those are the major use cases for this. And in those cases, they want that all list to properly represent which ones they have played and which ones they have merely deleted or not ever listened to. So that's the demand side of it. And I don't really work that way when I'm listening to stuff, and that's why I never really saw that need. But literally since the beginning, not only has this been a constant request, but people would write in not saying, hey, could you please add this feature, but saying, where is this feature? As if it's so fundamental to them that of course this feature would exist. They assume it must exist and they aren't finding it. Or it's a bug in my app that somehow it's not displaying. That's how fundamental people have thought this feature is.
I feel like I just blue screened. This is the antithesis of how I personally go through and listen to podcasts. Like, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying that I'm right and they're wrong. It's just, this never would have crossed my mind in a trillion years. Like to go surfing through the all episodes list and making decisions based on what you have or have not played. Like, I conceptually understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, but this is so foreign to me that this is how people choose to listen to podcasts.
Yeah, and this is why, like, a lot of the things I've added or changed in this version were about trying to accommodate more usage patterns than just the way I do things. I've always designed the app primarily for me, and if I can accommodate other people relatively easily, great. But it's always been designed like to fit my mental model of how I listen to things. But there's always been lots of other people who use it who don't use things the way I do. Like, I use playlists. I almost never play a podcast by going to the podcast screen and then playing it from there. I'm almost always playing it from a playlist screen. But yet, there's a lot of people who never use playlists or very rarely use them and only ever play from the podcast screen. So it's like there's always been these divides of like how people use it. It's such a fundamental like workflow for people, like how they play and manage their podcasts, that there's lots of different ways that lots of different people want to use this. And so, like, the features I added, I added the ability to have special playlist types that would show you episodes that are in progress, episodes that are downloaded, or all episodes that you have starred. In practice, I personally need none of those things, and I don't intend to actually use almost. I might have the starred list, here and there, if I want to like look up something again. But for the most part, I don't need any of those things. But they were very highly demanded features as well, because a lot of people, in the way their workflow works, they want to know which ones are in progress, or they want to know only which ones are downloaded, like if they're on a plane or something, or if they have like some kind of weird data restriction situation going on. So there's all these needs that I've been hearing about over and over and over again from my user base for a very long time. That's why I added these things. And Marcus Played was just so incredibly popularly requested, so frequently requested / demanded it so frequently. I decided not only to add it, but to add it prominently. That's why it has its own button on the toolbar next to the delete button. It's that demanded. That's how many people wanted this over such a long time that it had to be a top-level feature right there, very visible, right next to delete.
I mean, I hear you, but it's just like I said, I'm blue screening. It just seems so bananas to me, but whatever makes people happy.
I mean, you can see, like, if you look in our chat right now, our live chat, everyone's saying how they listen to podcasts, and it's all different. Everyone has different ways that they want these features to work, or different subsets of these features that they want to use. Half these people are like, why do you need that? The other half are like, how do you not need that? Like, it's just... this is just how this market goes. And so, the more versatile my app can be without, ruining itself and getting like too complicated, then I think, the better it is business-wise to do it. Now, the reception to the design, I think, shows quite a bit of maybe not discrepancy, but different preferences, let's say.
So tell me more about that.
When I was designing this, like, I remember I was sitting in in a hotel room. Tiff and I had taken a vacation right before Thanksgiving for a few days, just in upstate New York, and she had this idea, and forgive me, I've now told this story on 3 different podcast interviews that are all coming out around the same time. So I'm sorry if you've heard it before / we'll hear it again. But basically, she was looking through an app. I forget which app. It might have been Pinterest, I think. And she had these pill shaped, oval things that were showing topics or whatever. And she's like, look, this is what modern apps look like. Like, this is what people expect a new modern app to look like. And I saw those pills, and I'm like, I think, because for a while I've been thinking I want to, in the redesign, I was thinking I wanted to make playlists look better somehow. And I played with all sorts of ways to do it. I played with just giving them their own album artwork on the side, like their own little round rect on the left side, matching up with like the specs of the album artwork or the podcast below them. And I've tried different things over time with like how I represent them in CarPlay. If you've ever seen them in CarPlay, I did like a 2x2 grid of the artwork of the episodes that were in there, and I was trying to render that on the home screen, but it was looking really busy and ugly. I was trying to figure out, what do I want playlists to look like, and I couldn't nail it in my head. I couldn't figure out like everything I was trying, everything I would think of, like the little 2x2 artwork grid. I tried rendering the artwork like in a little stack as the icon for the playlist, and everything I tried just looked busy or ugly or both. I couldn't make it work. I couldn't nail it yet. And then when she showed me those pill shapes, I'm like, wait a minute. If I make them pill shaped, that changes how they look from the podcast below them in a very prominent way. And that would enable me to have more customization. And I was thinking maybe I could add icons. Maybe I could add custom colors. I've seen for years, people have been hacking this in bad ways. They've been, because before you couldn't have custom colors or icons or custom ordering of playlists. Those are all new. And so to get custom ordering, a lot of people have shown me screenshots over time where they would name the playlist like 1, workout, 2, running, like that kind of thing. And so they would prefix them with numbers. And to achieve icons, many people would just add emoji to the front of them. And I don't know, Casey, if you've heard about emoji.
I should look into that.
Yeah. So people have been doing these hacks to get around these limitations, but I thought I can do a much better job of this and make it much nicer if I first have manual reordering, because that's clearly a need that people have requested a lot over time. And then second, if I can have playlists have their own custom visual identity that people can just set whatever they want. So custom icon, custom color. So that's kind of where that came from. And I played with it, and I thought, and this is, people who have been, paying attention to, I hate to say it this way, but to my fashion preferences recently. I've said over time, I'm so tired of black computers and black t-shirts. I did that for a very long time. I did only that for a very long time. And now I'm like exploding with color. Like, just give me all the colors. Like, I recently changed my Apple Watch strap from white to yellow. Like, I'm all colorful now. And so I wanted to bring some of that energy into the app. It was a very aggressive design. And I intentionally, even during the beta testing, I played around a little bit with these things, but I decided I'm going to force color upon people by default. Now, if they want to remove some of that color, they can. It's customizable. I have had feature requests for people saying, can you please make gray a color? And I'm not going to do that for lots of reasons. Number one, it's hideous. Number two, I use gray to indicate an empty state for the playlist. So that it wouldn't work very well, and I don't intend to do it. But by default, if you want to go in there and set every color to one color, you can. But by default, I actually created a default color sequence that if you have multiple playlists, they all follow the same color sequence by default as you add them or as it runs first. Because I want people to try some color because it's nice. And, we've had a lot of dark times in the world in recent years, and maybe this will help a little bit. People feel a little bit nicer, and I think that's one of the reasons why, I don't know if you've noticed, colors are in fashion right now. And, not just like a color, but just being colorful is kind of in fashion right now. I hate that I'm telling you fashion advice, but this is the world we're in now. So anyway, the reaction to this, I was nervous about because it's a very big, bold change. One thing that's interesting is that some of the reaction has been, why did you make everything so big? Now, if you look at my screenshot comparisons, everything is exactly the same height.
Yeah.
Playlists, podcasts, and episodes are all exactly the same height as they were before. I think it's 88 points, something like that. Exactly the same height. Actually, playlists are, when you're in a playlist view, you actually have a few pixels of additional width for the title than you had before, because the way the artwork margins work out, you actually have more width for the title. But anyway, people view it as big and bold because before it was so sparse. Especially playlists. Playlists before on the home screen were just black text in the middle of a giant floating in the middle of a giant cell. Like it looked like, when I look back on it now, it looks like a rendering error. I'm like, they were so basic before. If you make things more colorful and put borders around them, people will think they're bigger, even though they're not. So that's fun. Anyway, so I was very confident launching this that I had made something good. That I was very proud of the design, and I was ready to assert to the world, if necessary, no, trust me, this is good. And if you don't like it, well, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to bow to, there were any demands to change it back. Like this is the way forward. I put it out there first to the beta group, and the beta group was pretty positive about it. There were like one or two people out of a couple of thousand maybe who were like, I really don't like this. I want to go back to the original. But for the most part, it was a relatively small percentage. Everyone else was pretty positive about it. And then when I gave out like press invitations to look at it and everything, and I knew press was all going to hit at once when it released on last Friday. The press was all set for a certain time, and I thought, here we go. Like, we're going to see what the press says. I have no idea. I'm confident. I think this is very good, but we'll see. And the press comes out, and actually, it was pretty universally positive. So I'm like, all right, here we go. I'm riding high now. Here we go. And then it starts getting out to all the users over that overall Friday. And I'm nervous as heck because I'm like watching my servers, thinking like, at the first run of the new version, the playlists assign themselves colors, and then they have to sync those changes to the servers. So on first run, everyone's playlists are going to have to sync new changes to the servers. So I'm watching the servers like a hawk, like, oh my God, is this going to explode? What's going on? Like, I approved it at like 2 a.m. or like midnight to go live at midnight, just so that most of those first syncs would happen overnight when the server traffic is low, But anyway, so I'm watching the press, I'm watching the servers, I'm really nervous. I start seeing all the reactions on Twitter, and they are amazingly positive. Everyone who's getting the update, they're all tweeting on Twitter, oh my God, this is great. Wow, look at that. Everyone's calling it words I don't even understand, like whatever young people say that when things are good. That I saw some of those words fly by, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I'm even getting young people to think it's good. Like, probably not all of them, because it's still a podcast app made by a 40-year-old guy, a programmer. But anyway, so I'm getting all these things, like all these praise. And so for the most part, it's been very, very good. However, the people who don't like redesigns tend to be a little bit slower on the uptake of updates for apps. So days 1, 2, and 3 were fantastic. Now that it's like day 6 or whatever, I'm getting a lot of bad emails. But when I look at the proportions, it is universally very, very well received. And I look at my, I'm of course I'm getting 1 and 2 star reviews as well from people who are angry. But if you look at the average still of new reviews coming in, it's still very good. So anyway, please, I would encourage you all. I don't ask this very often. If you want to rate Overcast, this is a good time to do it. Because right now I'm at maximum anger from those people who don't like things to be changed. But I'm not. This is not to say anything is dire. My average is still very good. It would be nice to have a little bit of goodness coming into my inbox for the next couple of days as the slower and more grumpy group gets in. Let me see I just deleted one a few minutes ago. This was amazing. Oh, I can't find it. Anyway, it was like a 1-word thing. It was like, the subject was like, it's poop. And there was an empty body.
Nice.
But yeah, so that's that's the caliber of things I'm getting. I'm getting nicer ones too, but they're just like, can we please have a switch back to the old design? Like, no.
Did you reset the ratings for this version?
No, I don't think I've ever done that.
Because I guess I've never rated Overcast. I just went in and rated it.
Thank you.
I said it was poop. So this is my turn to apologize for being a bad beta tester because, like, the part of the reason we forgot about the new Overcast version is because Casey and I have been using it forever because we've been on the beta, and we're just kind of used to it by now. It's not it was the new version for us like months ago or whatever, right?
Wait, by the way, but please, everybody out there, please don't, as a joke, review Overcast and say it's poop. Like, I know that sounds like a good.
Not funny.
That
not
might
funny.
In your head. That might sound like a good joke. Trust me, it won't be received that way by the other people who are looking at the Overcast page trying to decide whether they want to download this app or not, and don't know us and don't know you and don't know me. Like, trust me, that let's all laugh at that joke in our heads right now and then not do it. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, John.
So looking at I was thinking, I've been using the beta version for so long, and for the most part, I just, continued to use it the way I used it or whatever. But then I realized, like, when you do a release and you do like the blog post that explains all the features, I kind of wish you did that at the beginning of the beta instead of at the end, because I read the blog post and I learn things about the application I've been using for months. I'm like, oh, I didn't know it had that. Because, I mean, again, it gets back to, like, if you don't use those features or it's not the way you work with things, I'm not going to go hunting for them, right? So I just look at it and says, can I continue to use Overcast the way I've always used it? And, it looks different and it does a few more things. And, I noticed the mark is played button or whatever, like, oh, that's not for me. But then there's other things that it can do. And so I'm a bad beta tester in that the only time I actually really start exploring the app is after you release it and do the blog post that explains all the features that I should have been seeing. And yes, I do look at the test flight notes, but they're not always that informative. Certainly not as informative as the blog post. And so the second thing is now, for example, customizing playlists. I just accepted the colors and the names that you picked. I'm like, they look nice. It's fine. And, but you can customize these. You can change the colors. You can change the icons. And so after it's released officially, and I learned that from your blog post, I go in, I'm like, oh, I should change some of the, let me see if I can change some of the icons. And, of course, you talked about the SF symbols thing and everything. So I saw this huge list in there. And now I'd like to do in the grand tradition of, any of us releasing software on the show, I need to do my real-time bug report. So please,
awesome.
Please take out your
how the
iPhone
tables
now.
have turned.
Take out your iPhone now and go to a playlist and edit it. Go to playlist settings and then tap on icon. Please tell me when you're all there.
Okay.
All right. So this is what I did. I'm like, oh, look at all these icons. And I love that you have the search. And I knew that you did it like based on the accessibility data or whatever, like so you can do text search or whatever. So just type MUS for like searching for music. All right. And you type MUS. Oh, look, and it's narrowed down to a bunch of icons.
Mustache.
Mustache. Or they look like they're music symbols or whatever. So pick one of those. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go with the 3 music notes. And I tap on the 3 music notes. And then I stare at my phone and I'm like,
oh, yeah, I need a done button. I know.
So what do I do now?
Yeah.
And the answer is you hit cancel.
No. You hit the back button.
Or the back button. Neither one of those things feels like an affirmative action. I literally couldn't figure this out. I hit the X and I searched again and then I long pressed, then I was like hit cancel and then eventually I figured it out, but it is so not obvious how I'm going to
add a done button to the upper right.
Button. Yeah, like I need something that's like, and now because just hitting the 3 little arrows, that doesn't complete the screen. It's not like I found the icon I want and I hit it and the screen dismisses. It stays there staring at me and I don't know what to do. So
no, that is very valid. And in fact, Tiff did that when I was watching her use it for the first time and I just forgot to write it down. So yeah, no, that's true. That's good. Thank you.
Yes, and I'm sorry for not giving you that bug in the months that I was testing this beta, but there you go. I made up for it live on the show.
Well, you also didn't give me the same bug then, because in the version of Masquerade that as we record, I hope to release tomorrow morning, it's through app review. I just want to check a couple of things. Anyway, I rejiggered the way the default emoji settings page works, and there's a new settings page for face detection size where you can tell it even, make this a little bit bigger than just the face.
We have very large faces in my family.
Yeah, my family is full of big, hearty faces. Anyway, there's basically a slider, and the options in the upper left and right, in the upper left is just to go back to settings, and in the upper right, there's a reset button that is only valid if you've futzed about with, or, don't leave it exactly where you found it. And so in order to save your setting, you just go back, which is basically what Marco's got here. And I went back and forth about this, but it seems I actually think I like this more now, because as soon as you make a change, it is saved. And then there's a reset button in my case if you want to go back to the way it was. So I'm with you, Marco. I don't think you need a done button, but
no, I do need one.
You definitely need one. I mean, it really has to do with the context of like having things take effect in real time versus having select and then hit a done. It's really, really sensitive to like the expected context. Like, are you throwing up a sheet where you have to make the sheet go away? And if the only ways to make it go away are like cancel or back, those don't feel affirmative. Versus, are you flipping a switch and you're confident that when I flip the switch, the setting has taken effect because I've not placed into a second. Like, there's all sorts of cultural baggage of like when there is an expectation that you have to sort of say, I have now done the thing, yes, versus no, never mind everything I did. And we used to have this debate in the old days of Mac OS X of like, if you bring up a pref screen, like you bring up preferences and it's got a bunch of checkboxes for like, you want this setting on or off or whatever. Should the preferences take effect as soon as you hit that checkbox or only after you decide whether to hit OK or cancel on the preferences window? And that culturally changed between classic macOS and macOS X. The macOS X way to do it, by the way, is to essentially do it in real time. And then closing the prefs window is just like, I'm done setting things. But as soon as you hit that checkbox on a well-behaved macOS X, macOS, whatever we call it these days, application, that's it. That you've done the thing. Reticulate splines, check, right? That's it. And then closing the preferences window is, okay, well, now I'm just not going to do any more changes to preferences. But closing or not closing the preferences window should have no effect on, like, it's not like if you make a bunch of changes and then change your mind, there's no way to like get out of the preferences window and not commit those changes because they were committed the second that you did it. Whereas on iOS, I don't know all the cultural things, but I do know when I was on that screen, I didn't know what to do, and it seems like Tiff had the same problem. So that cultural context of bringing up a card or whatever you call that requires some affirmation, or it requires when I tap an icon, it self-dismisses and say, great, you've picked it.
Yeah.
UI is weird and hard. Like it's not a bug, but it's like it's a confusing part of the UI. And why was it confusing? For reasons that are actually very difficult to explain. Like it's not obvious. It's not obvious that this is, anyone can tell that that's wrong. It's only the type of thing that you would realize by, someone who didn't create the app and write the code to do it, attempting to use that screen.
All right. Any other complaints while I'm here?
It's not your fault, but there's nothing in FS Symbols for shower, bath, water, soap, like nothing. I have a shower playlist. Who doesn't have a shower playlist?
For shower, I use a thunderstorm icon.
But I'm just saying, it's not your fault. This is not an FS Symbols, but come on, like literally nothing.
What about lightning bolt?
For shower?
Well, because the thunderstorm.
Yeah, I searched for rain, but that's not. I don't shower in a rain cloud.
It's funny. It's a rain cloud. It's a shower.
Yeah, I think this is and this makes me this. I know you talked about this before. Like, I could use emoji, but what about SF Symbols? I'm sure there's an emoji I could use that would be a closer match. And I feel like SF Symbols has
there's a shower emoji.
Has a shower gap.
No, and I think the availability of SF Symbols, it is clearly a UI toolkit. It is not made for the purposes I'm offering it for here. Like, it is not made for arbitrary user input of classifying their podcast listening. Like, there's many weird omissions from it, and there's many things in it that have no business being selectable here. Like, there's like every number, every letter encircled or squared form. Like, maybe that's not necessarily needed here, or certain oddities like every individual button on a gamepad. Like, you can have those as your icons, because that's just needs of the system have. But anyway, I tried it with emoji. Like, I never shipped it as a beta, but I tried it in testing with emoji, and in this context, it looked a little bit dated. I had used emoji in my UI a lot. I used the emoji cloud and star icons, like on description labels in the episode cells, to indicate whether an episode was streaming or not. I had a couple of emoji like here and there in the interface, and when I first started doing that, I don't know, 5 years ago, it was a long time ago. When I first started doing that, it was cute and novel, and the use of emoji in UI was fairly unusual at that time. And in fact, John, I believe you even complained to me about it when I started doing it. But now I think that is a little bit dated for these purposes. Like Casey, in your app, it's a little bit different because the entire app is about emoji, so that obviously makes more sense there. In Overcast new design, with all the SF symbol icons everywhere, and with these, thick line weights and big, bold, flat colors and pastels, emoji didn't look right. I tried it, and it just didn't look good. And so I decided to just stick with SF symbols for these because it was just it was much better looking in context.
You know, I almost wonder, and maybe this exists, but something that I know we used a lot back in my web development days, which was a decade plus ago, was Font Awesome, which was, if I recall correctly, basically a font, but it was a bunch of glyphs. Think Wingdings, but less weird. And we would use that as like UI elements all over the place. And I feel like what we need is like a Font Awesome, but with glyphs, like a shower glyph, for example. So I was poking about on the Font Awesome website, and there's plenty of excellent shower glyphs that, to my eyes, are in the spirit of SF symbols. Now, I'm sure a person with much better design sense than me, which is basically almost everyone, would tell you that these are not really in the spirit of SF symbols. But you know what I mean? Like something along those lines that gives you more breadth. Because like you said, Marco, SF symbols is really designed to be used as UI elements or to supplement your user interface. Not exactly what you're doing. Like I don't fault you for doing it. I think it makes sense, but it's not really what SF symbols is about.
I think it's exactly what it's about, because there's lots of things that are representative. Like SF symbols, I don't think is about the semantics. It is really about the incarnation, which is like line drawings, clearly readable line drawings that are abstract representations of things. So it's not super amount of detail. The lines are pretty thick. They're good icons that are exactly for this type of thing. This is useful in your UI because it's not going to draw attention to itself like a subtly shaded cloud emoji would, right? That may clash with your UI, and like the emoji they're very bold and they have their own style, and that style is not the same style that the rest of the UI and Overcast has. So the SF symbols, I think this is a perfect use of it. It's just SF symbol's fault for not having anything there for shower. So maybe you could augment it by drawing one vector shower head icon, throw it in there. Like you should actually have a custom set of icons that you can add to SF symbols. And then eventually SF symbols get stuff added to it all the time, I think. Eventually it will probably get a shower head.
Yeah, and another common one people are complaining about the lack of is that there's not a lot of sports representation. There's like a sports court. There's like a basketball court looking or a tennis court looking thing, but that's like the main sports thing. There's not like different balls for each sport or whatever.
Not a soccer ball, tennis ball.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's also one of the great things about this. First of all, one of the great things about this is that I don't need to buy or commission or create this artwork. Like it is just there in the system waiting to be used. Secondly, there's all sorts of benefits you get by using it. So, for instance, they have all these different modes. They have these different rendering modes. You can render them as, what I'm doing here is hierarchical mode, where you can have like different levels of transparency in certain icons. Like if you look at the guitar icon that I use for music or my Fish playlist, that is like, they have these different layers of the guitars. Also, one of the big advantages is for accessibility settings, like if you enable the setting called bold text in the accessibility panel in the system, every icon in the app, including those, gets thicker.
That's nice.
Like, and not every SF symbol has a bold version. Like the guitar one doesn't, but most of them do. And so you have like variable weight. You have all these different, rendering modes they can be in. So there's a lot of advantages to using them. And also you have Apple keeping them updated, hopefully over time. They're always adding more. Like almost every point release of the OS adds more SF symbols. Not a lot more usually. The major releases tend to add larger numbers, but it's great that Apple has a team of designers that effectively now work for me for free. And that's fantastic. and for somebody like me, like I'm getting better at my app design skills. I'm not nearly as good as them at icon design, and I also am not nearly as good as them at just spending the time on that and drawing thousands of symbols. Like there's something like 3,800 SF symbols right now. I would never in a million years address even a tenth of that. So this is just a fantastic resource for me. And I think it looks really good in the app. I think it makes it look very, very modern. And the amount of reward that has to me of how great it looks and how much it enables versus how little effort and time and money and app file size, John, it takes for me, it's pretty great.
Oh, it looks real good. And I've been enjoying it, obviously. So kudos from me. But I will be sending you a 25-minute list of bugs and issues, a video, 25-minute video sometime tomorrow.
That's fine. Hey, do what you got to do.
Okay.
Have you watched mine yet?
I was going to say, I finally I had enough time to watch a portion of it, and I got to tell you.
Did you have 9 minutes to spare?
I had 9 minutes to spare. No, I think I removed approximately 15 pounds of text from the app during the 5 minutes that of your video that I was able to watch.
The entire app is now 5 kilobytes.
Yeah, exactly right. No, I actually got a little bit bigger on the pending release because I added a picture of me that I used on the aforementioned, how big do you want the face detection to be? And then did we talk about this? That the icon on the landing screen was not properly Retina because the two sized icons it appears that Apple bakes into your bundle. One of them is like a not very big iPad icon, and then I think there was one other one that was even smaller. And so I was just using the biggest one I could. And a couple of eagle-eyed users were like, "Hey, man, why is this not Retina? Is this broken?" Well, no, it's not really broken. I just didn't want to add another icon just for that one screen. And then I got browbeat enough about it that I allowed myself to add one more icon in there. And so the app is probably like 5 or 6 megs now instead of 3 or 4, something along those lines. I'm so sorry.
I think you're still okay.
We did talk about this. His name was Stampy. You loved him. Reference from Marco to
I got it.
No, I got nothing.
Simpsons did it. We are brought to you this week by Memberful. Monetize your passion with membership. Memberful allows you to build sustainable, recurring revenue by selling membership programs directly to your audience. It is the easiest way to do this, and it's used by some of the biggest creators on the web. We know right from this show, we know that it's really good to diversify your income. If you're a creator, if you have an audience out there, it's really, really great to not just rely on ads or to be entirely, direct payment based. And Memberful really makes it easy to do that. They seamlessly integrate with all the tools you already use. They have great support to help you get integrated and get set up if you want to. And their incentives are aligned with yours. And so what this means is that, they just want you to make money because they provide the tool and you provide the content, and that's it. It's a nice relationship. They're not trying to take over. You retain control and ownership of your audience, your brand, and your membership. Payments even go directly to your own Stripe account. So you are really retaining tons of control here. Meanwhile, they're offering tons of great features to you. Custom branding, gift subscriptions, Apple Pay, free trials, private podcast support, and tons more. So it's just fantastic no matter what you're selling. Memberships for podcasts or YouTube channels or other kinds of content, they have you covered no matter what you are doing. And again, they really let you have full control over this. That's why I really respect them a lot, because I would never consider something that didn't give me that kind of control, and they really do. You can see for yourself with a free trial with no credit card required at memberful.com/ATP. You can start there, poke around the tools, take a look around, see what this can do for you. It is so great to diversify your income, and membership is a great way to do that, and Memberful is a great way to offer membership. So memberful.com/ATP one more time for that free trial. Get started today. Thank you so much to Memberful for sponsoring our show.
Unforgettable Luncheon, very good name, writes, do you have any preferred file naming scheme that you follow? Recently in my university degree, we were told to name our files with the prefix year, month, day, _ title, _ subtitle. For example, this is with no hyphens or anything. So example, 20210329 _ proj3 _ site plan. But this seems clunky and space inefficient to me. I feel like we've talked about this before. This is going to horrify a lot of people, as with so many of my opinions. But for general usage, I don't favor year, month, day. However, for file names or things where I'm going to be sorting by file name and I know I want this stuff to be sortable, then yeah, year, month, day with hyphens. And then use spaces like an adult, and kind of do whatever you want after that. Marco, what is your opinion on this? And then we'll round it out with John telling us what we should believe.
It depends a lot on context.
Yeah, I agree with that.
What John is probably going to mention is that the file system does keep track of things like creation date, modification date. However, and I'm sure John's going to mention this as well, the problem is when you're in this kind of context of, okay, you're in a university program, you're creating documents, you're probably going to be sending them around to people. Well, as they get moved around, if they get emailed or Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever, Google Driven, whatever it is, as they go around, the opportunities for them to lose this metadata on someone else's computer or in some other context increase dramatically. So if you're relying only on creation date in the file system to indicate when something was made, and that's not represented actually in the file, like in a document, like actually as text created on whatever, or as metadata somewhere, if you're relying on that, it's going to get lost as these things travel around. Now, when I make files on my own personal computer, I have faith that those things are not going to be a problem for most of my files here. Like I've learned to trust the file system and its metadata for the most part. As I'm using my own computer, that tends to be maintained, and so I can look and see modification or creation dates, and they tend to be accurate. That isn't true of everything though, and of all contexts. And that's why I think it depends. Like in this kind of situation where you're working with other people a lot, you're sending files between other people a lot, I see why they would do something like this. There are good reasons for that in that context, even though I personally don't bother doing that. With one exception, and that is for files that I'm not naming, that are being named automatically by something else. When that is the case, and I think my most common version of that is whenever I have a sheet-fed scanner, and it automatically creates PDF files of whatever I scan in this folder in Dropbox, and those files are just named just like this, like year, month, date, and then number within that day that I scanned them. Because most of the time I'm scanning paperwork so I can get rid of it, and I don't usually need to reference most of that paperwork again. I need it to have names so that it exists in the file system and I can find it somewhat, but I don't need those names to be very meaningful. I don't need to manually type in date dash electric bill. I don't go to that. I just let it be the date. And if I ever need to find something, I just think about roughly when it was and go to that time range and just start, hitting up arrow with the preview, with quick view open, and just browse through my PDF scanner around that time. Oh, here it is. I've never had any trouble finding stuff that way, because, adding to that is much more common than reading from it for me. But other than that, I don't do this.
John, what's the right answer?
So school, work, and other institutions will make you comply with all sorts of things. So if they say you have to name your TPS report this way, you name your TPS report that way. That's just part of life, so, don't worry about it. But for doing stuff, your own personal things, here are a few things I would encourage. I would encourage you to only put things in the file name that describe the content of the file. Surprisingly often, that includes the date. Even though, yes, of course, I'm going to say the file system has dates or whatever. If the document, if describing the content of the document means it includes a date, put it in the file name. So, for example, tax return 2001. You're not saying the file was created in 2001. You're not duplicating file system metadata here. You're saying it's really important that I know which year this tax return is for. Put that in the file name. And yeah, then you can do it year, month, day. You can put year at the beginning, year at the end, do whatever you want. But putting dates in the file name is not ridiculous. It's only ridiculous if the date you put in the file name is the same as the creation or modification date, just because you're mirroring that data. And again, people may make you do that or whatever, but that's a little bit silly. And for portability reasons, like if you want that to be preserved, it's super important that people know the year, month, and day this file was created. Even though it has no intrinsic connection to the content, that is a little bit sketchy, but you got to do what you got to do. I think even in the age of the internet and all it's use spaces between words. Like the internet can handle it, right? I promise you, the HTTP protocol will not die. I know lots of people don't do encoding stuff right. I know sometimes things are not URL encoded and they're not double encoded, and people get confused about plus versus %20. But like functionally speaking, it can work. So for your own purposes, use spaces to separate words, please. Don't use hyphens or underscores. Computers don't need those things. You may feel like you need them, and you're like, how am I ever going to tab complete something with a space in it? All these things are possible. I promise you. There's no reason for you to be reading things that look like, a bunch of little snakes tying together your words. Like I I prefer to use title case when I title my file names. You can do all lowercase if you want to feel like you're cool or whatever, but like I feel like words, capitalization is important for a reason. URL is all capitals. Acme or whatever, like IRS is all capitals. Like maybe Acme isn't or whatever, but use proper capitalization in your words. Don't if for dates and stuff and other things that are in the file system metadata that do not describe the content of the files, to help you, to discourage you from doing that, think about how weird it would be. Think of how absurd you would feel if your quote unquote naming scheme for your files was, whenever I name my files, I always put the file size in the file name. Right? Nobody does that. And the only reason nobody does that is because we all have 100% confidence that the file size is something that will transfer with the file, whereas we have very little confidence that the modification or creation date will transfer with the file, right? So I kind of understand what the differences there, but in general, describe the content of the file. Don't try to mirror a file system metadata.
And then finally, in the middle, we have Carson Brown writing, I've been experimenting with Time Machine setups and noticed that backing up to an SMB share is very slow compared to an external drive attached via USB, especially since it's all wired. Has that ever made you reconsider backing up to a network attached storage? No, not for me. I don't want to be bothered having to physically connect.
I reconsider it all the time because it is so slow.
It really is slow.
It's the slowest thing ever. And especially as drives get bigger, it just seems like it gets slower. So I'm actually highly interested in this topic, and I've been keeping up with, Howard Oakley at Eclectic Light Company. He's also constantly fighting with this and trying to figure out why Time Machine is taking so long and the different techniques it uses to back things up. And like all I really care about is bottom line, why is it so damn slow? So we'll put 2 links in the show notes for what is the state of the art of trying to make Time Machine not be as slow as balls when backing up to a NAS. And apparently the only thing that actually has any effect whatsoever is if you globally disable I/O throttling for background processes in macOS, right? macOS does not apparently have a way for you on a per process basis, especially an already running process like Backupd or whatever, to make it not be throttled. And, by default, macOS, gives less priority to background jobs. So when it runs the thing, that's running Time Machine or Spotlight indexing, it is intentionally saying, don't swamp the machine, right? You have a low priority, do things slowly, pace yourself, don't go nuts. But you don't want that. You don't want the thing like the performance of your Mac falling off a cliff because Spotlight indexing is happening, which is the thing that used to happen back in the day.
Right. And in fact, this is actually one of the major reasons why the M1 architecture computers get such great battery life and aren't so hot and loud all the time, because most of those background processes also get forced to run on the efficiency cores instead of the high performance cores. And you can right now, I can look at mine and I see I have the Backblaze BZServe thing running on the efficiency cores right now because it's a background process, just backing up cloud stuff, and so it doesn't need constant, high CPU, high performance access. And whereas in the past, with Intel machines that had symmetric cores, you would have Dropbox or Time Machine or MDS or whatever maxing out a high performance Intel core, and it would not throttle that, and so it would make your machine heat up and kill your battery life. So having the asymmetric core thing here really helps a lot in terms of the amount of processing power background tasks are given.
Even back in the Intel days, you still had processor priority in terms of how much CPU you got, but they couldn't go on a cooler core for the most part. They would just go on the same core as anything else. The I/O throttling in particular, though, is saying how much disk I/O is it allowed to do. And as you can imagine, Time Machine backup, all it's ever doing is basically waiting around for I/O to complete. So it's not like it's burning your CPU, but if left to its own devices, it would be like read files as fast as possible. I've got thousands and thousands of files to back up, and just one after the other in parallel and multiple processes, whatever it's going to do, I can't get enough of those files, and I got to send a bunch of network requests, so there's some more I/O, and so the I/O throttling is the thing that is slowing it down, because the I/O throttling says, seems like you just did 100 file operations at a fraction of a second, maybe chill a little bit, right? There's a limit to how fast it can go. So if you want Time Machine backups to a NAS to go faster, you can globally disable the I/O throttling on the entire system. And that doesn't just affect Time Machine, it affects every single process the machine is now exempt from this global thing. You don't want to do that in general. But if you know, like, okay, I just got a new Mac or I just got a new Synology, and I need to do like my initial backup, and it's like 4 terabytes, and it's going to take like a day. Maybe globally disable that thing because it can speed up the process. And you can read the links to find out about it. It annoys me that it's so slow. It makes some sense. Like, this is something that's counterintuitive to anyone who hasn't ever done server-side development, but doing anything to lots of small files takes way, 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 way longer than doing something to an equivalent number of equivalent size of large files, right? So one 1 gigabyte file versus a million files that are whatever a gigabyte divided by a million is. Night and day difference. And if you, as you do things over the network, where everything that you do has to be like, send this thing over the network, find out what happened at the other end when it completed, and go back and forth. It just adds so much overhead. You burn up all your time on overhead and very little time on actually doing anything, and that slows stuff way down.
Did we ever figure out, like, one of the things when APFS launched, the potential promise existed for a much better and more efficient time machine. That never happened, did it?
No, it did. One of the strategies that Time Machine uses, Time Machine has multiple strategies to answer the question, what changed since the last time I ran? One of the strategies is APFS snapshot diffs. And that is a very efficient way to find out what has changed. The problem is, okay, now that you know what's changed, do you also have an efficient way to send those changes to a NAS over SMB? And the answer is no. There's nothing like SMB doesn't know about APFS. SMB, there's no like wire, like ZFS had a protocol where you could send snapshot diffs as a byte stream. As long as it was ZFS on the other end, you could do that. But if you're just doing, it's doing SMB, it has no idea what the file system is on your Synology. It's probably like BTRFS or ext4 or whatever. Like, so that snapshot functionality can help with local backups. I don't even think they're doing the byte stream thing. I'm not sure if that exists, but snapshot diffing is one of the things. But if you look in the logs and say, hey, Time Machine, what strategy did you pick? Often it will pick the old one, which is FS events, ID. I last processed event ID 123, and now I'm going to start picking up from there. It picks whatever it thinks will be the most efficient strategy. But snapshot diffing is one of the strategies to figure out what changed. I'm not sure if there is any plausible way for it to then say, okay, now that I have the snapshot diff, can I get a block stream? Because to do that, even with ZFS, you kind of need the other file system to sort of be on the same page to efficiently receive the changes. Anyway, I still have hope that it can get better over time, and it has gotten a little bit faster over time, but the IO throttling is the biggest culprit right now.
I mean, it could also presumably like store it on the other end in a different format that is more like, blocks, big block chunks instead of individual files. I mean, but I mean, it's using a sparse bundle a lot of the times now. But so is that not as efficient? Like,
I mean, the sparse bundle is just inefficiency on top of inefficiency because so let's say you're using ext4 on your Synology, right, and you're doing it over SMB. But for it to work, there has to be a disk image, and the disk image is APFS, and that's one more abstraction of these little stripe files in the sparse bundle folder. It's like abstraction on top of it. It does not make things faster to do this, right? So, there is potential for it to be better, but I wouldn't want the backup to be stored in some weird, super efficient format, right? I like the fact that if I go onto my Synology, I can see the files. If you mount that disk image, you see the files sitting there. It's different than using hard links with HFS, right? Now it uses the clone files and stuff like that. It is much better than it was, and it is getting better all the time, but there are definitely ways that it could improve. And every time I see how long it's going to take to do a backup to my Synology, it makes me wish it was just a little bit faster. It makes me wish kind of that there was a big button that I could say, Time Machine, I'm going to be away from my computer for an hour. Use all available resources, no throttling, go as fast as you can, saturate my bandwidth, max out the IOPS on my Synology, just get the backup done. And instead it's so polite. It just doles out the bits one at a time and it takes forever to finish.
Yeah, I've actually been considering, it's funny, I bought my Synology here with the intention, not that long ago, I talked about it right in here on the show, of it being only a Time Machine device. But it is really slow for that. I was thinking about I've actually repurposed a little bit of it, and I'm now using it for archive file storage as well, and I have a backup thing that's backing it up to Backblaze B2. And
it's like buying a bigger house, so you just fill the rooms.
Yeah, and now I'm thinking maybe I should actually move Time Machine off of that because now I freed up the little SSD I was using as my archive drive at my desk.
So much faster.
Yeah, so I can just Velcro this SSD under my desk and just have that be a local Time Machine. I think I might do that because it is so much faster. And I mean, I hardly ever need to restore anything from Time Machine, but the process of restoring it from a NAS is like hilariously slow. Like if you think backing up is slow, try reading the backups. It's amazing. So yeah, I have been kind of thinking of flipping that over.
Finally, C writes, Apple's been making their own chips for a while. It seems that Apple's been bringing more and more components in-house over the years. Do you think that Apple will ever create, design, and/or manufacture their own display panel, at least for larger displays like the iMac and the Studio display? I mean, on an infinite timescale, yeah, of course. But I don't see that happening anytime soon, personally, because it seems like they outsource damn near all that to LG, don't they? At least on the computer side of things.
Or Samsung. I mean, you know, I don't see this ever happening, honestly, even on an infinite timescale, because Apple outsources things that are commodities. You know, they don't make their own flash storage. They don't make their own memory chips. You know, like these things are areas in which a specialized manufacturer who specializes in that kind of component is able to just iterate like crazy and make really good ones of these things that are not, I mean, I hate to minimize the work, but like not as complicated and not as differentiable, if that's a word, compared to something like designing their own processors. They aren't even manufacturing their processors, but they are designing them, you know, and they're certainly, you know, making all their own software, making all their own tools. Like there's all sorts of these areas where Apple is able to do things in a much more custom way and have a much bigger impact on things. Whereas, like, are they really going to make a better display panel than Samsung or LG? Maybe, but they could also just order them from Samsung and LG and be fine. And those components, I think Apple would consider too boring and too commoditized, and there's not enough reason for them to make it because they can already buy the best ones of those in the world from other people, whereas they can't buy the best software from other people. They can't buy the best processor design from other people. Like, you know, they can make that themselves and be way ahead of everyone else by doing that. Whereas this kind of thing, you know, these kind of like, you know, basic commodity component type things, I don't think Apple would gain anything by making it themselves, and they don't have any reason to take on that burden when the rest of the market is supplying that very well when they order it from them.
Well, it's the differentiation you mentioned, like the Tim Cook thing is like, we don't want to enter market unless we think we can make a significant difference. And recall from episodes a long time ago, months, years, that Apple has been reportedly investigating micro LED displays, like itself. And again, we're talking about display panel, like setting aside, like obviously Apple had a big hand in designing the XDR and everything, but like the display panel itself, not all the electronics and the backlight and everything, but just the display panel. Micro LED is something that lots of manufacturers have created at various sizes, but not at the sizes that would work in any Apple devices. And if Apple somehow, if those rumors are true, and Apple was funding attempts to develop micro LED, I don't want to get into the details, but it's a different screen technology. It's different than OLED. It's different than LCD, and it is in theory better than both of them. If they had some kind of breakthrough there where they succeeded in making a micro LED screen, let's say that's like for the Apple Watch or something, where no one else has been able to do that in a cost-effective manner, and Apple manages to do it, that would be a big competitive advantage for their product. They would be able to make a big difference, not necessarily in the market because they wouldn't be selling to other people, but suddenly they would differentiate their product. Like their watch battery life would be much higher, or their screen would be much higher quality, or whatever. So I don't see Apple making an LCD display or an OLED display, because those are technologies with established players. It's what is it? Red Ocean versus Blue Ocean. It's Red Ocean. They're all out there killing each other to try to make the best LCDs, the best OLEDs, all that other stuff, right? But so far, no one has succeeded in micro LED of the type that Apple would be interested in. So that's why it wasn't too surprising to me that they might be investigating that. It would be useful in AR headset. It'd be, if Apple could somehow make cost-effective micro LED, it's useful in every single one of their products and is superior than almost everything. If it has the potential to be superior to all other technologies, right? But I don't know if that rumor is true. I don't know if that's the thing they're actually doing. Maybe they're just partnering with somebody who is like helping invest. A lot of people in the chat room are pointing about this. Apple does spend a lot of money trying to get other companies to build the thing it wants. And it spent a long time doing that with Intel, in fact. So even when it buys things from other people, it likes to use its money and its potential ordering capacity to influence the things that they make to get the thing that it wants. So maybe those rumors we're hearing is just Apple investing in some company that was already on its way to making micro LED, because Apple knows that if they can get first dibs on that product, like that'll be a competitive advantage for them or whatever. So I would say never, because I think Apple is interested in breakthroughs like that. Solid state batteries is another example, or who knows what they're doing with the car stuff. It's just that historically speaking, that is not how Apple has added its value. It's not to say that they couldn't do that. Like arguably they did a lot of original work with like, not perfecting the mouse, but sort of like who had a lot of experience building computer mice before Apple? Not a lot of companies. And Apple shipped them on every single one of their Macintosh computers, so learned pretty quickly how to make one of those that's decent, right? But even there, they, they weren't the first to make an optical mouse or anything like that. They eventually just let the rest of the market pick up for them. So I think it would be kind of neat, but it seems like a reach.
Thanks to our sponsors this week, Memberful, Remote, and Backblaze. And thanks to our members who support us directly. You can join at atp.fm/join. We will talk to you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
I have an after show.
Oh, all right.
It's so rare that I have an after show.
I know. I'm excited.
Yeah. I'll give you, to make it a game of it, I'll give you each one guess what my after show is about.
TVs.
The freezer.
You're so fast on the guesses. That didn't even take a second to think about it. You got a TV or freezer. Those are your two guesses, huh? Oh, well.
So which one of us was right?
Well, you're both wrong. My after show is that I quit my job.
What? Wait, what? Really?
And I'd like to say that in the guessing game, Merlin got it on the first guess.
Well, that's
what?
This entire show I've spent with just blue in front of my eyes. Wait, you quit your job?
I did.
You didn't lead with this?
No, it's an after show topic.
How did you make us sit through? How have we sat through an hour, 57 minutes, and 38 seconds of chatter? And this is now the time that you decide to come out with this?
It's the after show. It's where we talk about personal. So I have a whole podcast where I talk about my feelings in my life. It's called Reconcilable Differences. If you listen to episode 179, you will learn all about this, and you'll hear me talk about it at length that I'm not going to talk about it here because we're just in the after show or whatever.
And that isn't out yet, right? As we record?
Oh, no, it's out right now.
Oh, my God. When did it come out?
John, I hate you so much right now.
If you
Oh, it came out today?
If you go to hypercritical.co, you will see the top post on my website is a text version of an explanation of this whole thing.
When did that go live?
Well, oh, my God.
That went live about 3 seconds ago.
John, I'm going to kill you. Okay, before I kill you, and I'm not going to read this right now. First of all, congratulations. Since you said you quit, you didn't get laid off or fired or anything like that. So congratulations. Can you give us the short version of what the plan is from here? Are you getting a new job or are you pulling a Casey?
I don't want the short version. Give me the full version.
I know. I love the full version, but I know I'm not going to get it.
The long version is on Rectifs. On Rectifs, I started out giving like a FAQ type thing because I just felt like we were in that mindset, and it's probably a useful approach here. So I'll give a mini FAQ version here. Mini FAQ. Did I get fired or get laid off? No, I quit. Do you have a new job lined up? No, I don't. Do you have a terminal disease? No, not that I know of. What is the plan here? The plan here is to do podcasting and other stuff as the way I make my living, just like Marco and Casey, to varying degrees, do as well.
That's awesome.
I am so unbelievably proud and excited. I cannot even tell you. I know I probably don't sound it, but I'm like smiling ear to ear. I'm so excited for you.
I never would have guessed this. I thought you were like a company man forever.
Same.
Well, another fact item that I think people need to hear. Have you suddenly come into some huge amount of money that makes this possible? Like, are your podcast suddenly making more money? Did you win the lottery? Like, did a whole bunch of new people sign up for membership and now suddenly it's possible, whereas before it wasn't? No, that did not happen. So they're like, it's like, why now? Why not before? Well, you can read my blog post about it, which I think was the smallest time investment to get this, or you can listen to the longer Rectives episode. And I'm sure we can talk about it more in future episodes of this show if you would like. But I just wanted to throw it in the after show because it's important news. And the other thing I'll say on this show, which I also said in my blog post, is this is a good opportunity to thank everybody who is listening to this podcast, thank anyone who has ever listened to the podcast, thank everyone who has ever read anything that I've written or gone to a live show or bought a t-shirt or done any of those things, because all of those people are the people who made it possible for me to attempt to do this. Obviously, Casey made a similar decision back in 2018. Marco made a similar decision back in 2010. I said in my post, like, it seems like everybody I know has done this before me. So I have all this experience watching other people do it, and now I'm going to give it a try myself. So we'll see how it goes.
I am so excited and so proud of you. I echo what Marco said a moment ago. Never in a million trillion years did I think you would make this leap.
Yeah.
And I know that the math is a little bit different for you than it is for anyone else on the planet, but I still am extremely excited and proud of you. This is very, very big John Syracuse energy that you did this quietly and didn't confer with your two friends here, but that's okay. It might have been worth it just for this bombshell moment right now.
Totally worth it.
But I am overjoyed. I'm so excited and so proud of you.
Yeah, I mean, if you read the post in the podcast, you'll see that I've been thinking about this for years. It is not like, it's kind of a coincidence that in recent ATP episodes we had a bunch of questions like, how does John fit everything in, and what's the deal with John didn't do any research? Like, but that is not that was just a happy coincidence. I was smiling when hearing that because this is a plan I've had for multiple years. In fact, I had a date certain set to do this multiple years ago. And then something else happened with the world that caused me to maybe reconsider that. So when COVID came, everything got put on hold, and so this is not a decision I made at spur of the moment. This is a multi-year long process that was going to go off and then didn't, and then I reconsidered again. And anyway, you can read all about it. But yeah, this is it's just in time for my kids to go to college, so it's a great time to put my income in an uncertain position.
Oh my God, this is great. I really am genuinely extremely surprised, genuinely extremely happy, and just, oh man, I'm so happy for you. This is great. Congratulations.
I hope it is great. I mean, coming from the two of you who already have been there for a while, and you sound like it's great for you. So I hope it will be great for me too.
Oh, think of all the jokes we can now make. Because before you were like, well, when you worked at a job, now none of us work at jobs. This is great.
Does this mean we're going to start recording for like European friendly times from time to time? Because now the day is our oyster, right?
We can discuss. There are multiple other factors in flight here, but
yeah,
yes, there are many things. I've felt bad because I've been trying to keep it a surprise, so it could be a surprise on this show, and so I haven't been able to talk to people about things. But now that will change, and we'll see. We'll talk.
Oh my gosh, John Syracuse, I'm so excited for you. I'm so incredibly excited for you. I am gobsmacked. I cannot freaking believe. Holy crap. This rocks my... I don't even know what to ask you right now. I'm so stunned.
Well, that's why he did the frequently asked questions. He addressed all of the most frequent things we would think of.
No, there's many more. Like, I mean, I didn't... One phrase that I did not mention in my post about this is midlife crisis, because I really honestly don't feel like this fits the definition of midlife crisis, other than the, like, getting older and recognizing your mortality type thing. But it's again, not something I went into, at a spur of the moment spontaneously. It's just generally not how I do things.
Wow, this is incredible. Yep. I'm so surprised. I would never have guessed that this would happen.
You both didn't guess, but Merlin got it on the first guess.
Wow. He's smarter than us.
With no context, because I sprung it on him 100% is the same. Like, no hints, no context, no nothing.
Wow. All right. So when is if you're willing to share, when is your last day at your jobby job?
It was last Friday.
Oh, you're already done?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I hate you so much right now.
I mean, Directives records way ahead of schedule. So they had to coordinate all of this stuff,
Wait, so you said this past Friday. So as we record, it's Wednesday. What'd you do all week?
Same stuff I always do, just without the work part.
Well, what did you do during the day?
Let's see. You sound like my wife. She's like, what did you after the Monday was my first day without a job. Like, what did you do all day? It's like, surprisingly not that different. Like on that Monday, I think what I did was I wrote this blog post. All right, so that's one thing I did. Finalized the t-shirt designs, uploaded them to the Google Drive. Let's see. I did some cooking and puttering around the house, drove kids to places, took out the garbage, made dinner, like just a normal day with like the normal amount of podcast, worked on the show notes for ATP, worked on the show notes for Rectifs, did all coordinated people of getting the Rectifs episodes up because I posted them while we were recording. So one of you couldn't listen to the episode beforehand and no listeners could listen to it and spoil it or, that's kind of what I did with my day. And so it's like the same thing I do in normal days, except for normally insert all that activity as like context switch constantly with a normal 8-hour workday.
Oh, I'm still, I heard every word you said, but I'm not sure I was listening because I'm so happy. Oh my God.
I ate breakfast without my laptop on the table next to me.
Imagine that.
I don't even have a laptop. I returned that accursed thing. That was the best part of this. No more butterfly keyboard. Return that thing. I said, take it back. God, I hated that laptop so much by the end. It was getting so slow, and not because of the laptop. It's just like the corporate malware they were putting on it and everything. I'm so happy to not have that.
Yeah, no more corporate malware.
They added more. They added, I think we talked about this in one of the Slacks we're in. They added an app called Santa that would intercept application launch, and it would tell you whether the app was naughty or nice, right?
That's creepy as hell. Like that, there's whoever designed that and whoever bought it at your company, they need to like really evaluate that.
And it was flagging everything. It was like, oh, you want to run expand drive so you can do SSHFS to your dev machines? Expand drive. We don't know what that is. Santa says it's naughty. Would you like to request access to use it? I'm like, oh,
ew,
that's so bad.
Oh my God, how does anybody work anywhere?
That's like that was new as of like a few months ago, and it was like, this is not helping me.
Sometimes I wonder, like, I often wonder whenever I have to deal with a real company and, like I'll be like, on a call or something that somebody had insisted on having and there'll be like 17 people on the call and 2 of them talk. And I'm like, what are all these other people here for? What do these people do? I hear from, you like read reports about how big a company is like on the web. You say, oh, wow, Twitter or whatever has 5,000 employees, whatever it is. And you're like, what do they need that many people for it? But I think the answer is like they create their own overhead, like stuff like that. It's like, well, it was somebody's job to choose that. It was somebody's job to to purchase it, to set it up, to maintain it. I assume somebody has to behave like I guess the elf and receive those inbound requests for running your expand drive and other like boring things that people need that this is somehow thinking are naughty. I mean. And so there's all this overhead BS. Like John, I am so incredibly happy that all of that is now in your past. Mm-hmm. Because I will warn you, and I know you probably already know this, but I will warn you that this will ruin you, and that in a matter of weeks you will be unemployable. Not because nobody would ever hire you, but because you will not tolerate anyone else's crap ever again.
I don't know. I had like 25 years of tolerating it. I feel like that is a skill. The ability to tolerate that and to sort of thrive in that environment is a skill I will probably never lose. But we'll see.
See, and I feel the same way about myself. But I'm sure if I put my money where my mouth is, I bet Marco would be right.
You were in it for a little less time than I was, Casey. So you may come out of it. Marco was barely in it before he escaped, and he really is unemployable.
Yeah, that's true, and I've been out of it the longest. But yeah, I mean, I was barely employable when I was employable.
I had to find it for my blog post. I had to find your when did Marco leave Tumblr? Right, I had to find the post about that. It was like a 2-paragraph post. It was not very long. I mean, maybe you had a longer one later where you reflected on it, but you're like, day of thing, like, oh, I'm no longer a Tumblr. It's like 5 sentences long. You see it linked in it.
Well, because that was careful because at the time, we didn't want to like alarm anybody. I was, the earliest employee of Tumblr and I was leaving. And so and at the time I didn't have like an obvious there were some people who took over my duties, but it wasn't like a high profile replacement thing, and so we didn't want to alarm people, so that's why David and I very carefully wrote that together, to really just make sure are we going to be okay here? Are we not going to alarm people? Try not to make a big deal out of this. So that's why that was so short, and why I really never addressed it again.
Well, anyway, I found it. Oh, it's so hard to find things on your site too, Mark. What, you don't have any kind of archive page that lists all the posts somewhere?
Yeah, it's not all of the posts, but if you scroll to the bottom, it lists them all by month and year.
Does it? Let's see if
I think by month at least. Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Archives. I guess I was on an individual post. Let's see.
Yeah, it's not
Overcast
a good
redesign.
I search my site the way everyone else searches their site using Google site : that's.
I was on an individual post. Like if you're on the Overcast redesign one, at the bottom of that page, there's nothing. There's Twitter, RSS feed, stuff like that. But the archive is only on the homepage, and then your main top nav is apps, podcast, Twitter, about, but only on the homepage. Homepage is the archive thing. Anyway,
will you now post 3 posts a year on your blog?
I've already done.
I was going to say we're there.
I did the two streaming app things. Who knows? Will I post to my blog more? I don't know. Don't limit my options. Who knows what I'll do?
So sitting here now, what do you suspect your day will be? Are you planning to
Destiny.
take some
Destiny?
I asked this. I mean, I jokingly, yes, all Destiny. But in all seriousness, what I thought I was going to be doing when I stopped my jobby job is very different than what I'm actually doing now that I stopped my jobby job, several years ago now. What do you think sitting here now will be your day-to-day after you allow yourself some time for house projects and taking a damn break after 25 years? What do you expect to be doing to fill your day?
Well, one of the things that sort of led to this decision, again, you can see it summarized in the post, and I talked about it in Rectifs, is I've had to turn down a lot of things, both my own ideas of hey, wouldn't it be neat if and then I would reject myself and say, well, you can't do that because you got other things to do. Well, what about if I tried this? Oh, you don't have time for that, right? And also opportunities that are sometimes presented to me. Hey, would you like to do X? Actually, I would like to do X. Oh, but I can't because I'm already doing all the things that I could possibly do, right? So now suddenly I don't have to reject literally every idea or opportunity that comes my way. I can actually say yes to some of them. And so that's something I will pursue. Will any of those things go anywhere? I don't know. But it annoyed me before that I literally couldn't really say yes to anything. After I had sort of calibrated what I was doing to sort of fit within my life, which was part of what we talked about in the past in this show, was how does John fit everything in? I had selected all the things that I did to fit within my life, but just barely. There was not any room for anything else. And so whenever there was anything bad that happened or whatever, things would overflow. Or the example I gave in the post is when I decided to make those 2 Mac apps. That's a thing I had always wanted to do. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And that was kind of a mistake because that was over my limit of the things that I could handle. My regular job, all the family stuff, all my podcasts. Oh, and by the way, now you're going to make 2 Mac apps in 2 months and, do releases of those and support them. That was painful to do because it showed just how close to my limit I'm constantly running at. And even it's I'm just going to do the thing I always wanted to do. And a lot of the fun was sucked out of it by well, now you're going to get even less sleep, right? Now you're going to be even more tired. Now you have even more things to think about and worry about. And that just showed I either decide that these are the only things I'm ever going to do, or I have to remove something. To reiterate the John didn't do any research thing from the song, the deal with ATP was I had just come off Hypercritical and I was burned out on podcasting, again, having gone over my current capacity with my current family constraints and everything. And I was just I can't do this anymore. And you're oh, why don't you come do a car show? It'll be casual. We'll just do a thing. It won't be a big deal. It'll be so much easier than that tech thing that you were doing. And that, of course, eventually turned into ATP accidentally. And the whole pitch was, but we don't want you to burn out again, John. So don't do any research like you did for Hypercritical and everything. We don't want you to quit the show because you can't handle it anymore. And obviously, whatever it is that 9-10 years or however long we're into this later, obviously I didn't quit the show. What happened instead was I quit my job.
Mission accomplished.
So when push came to shove and it was like, you want to do new things, what needs to get pushed out? It's not like, oh, sorry, guys, I got to leave ATP. I just left my job.
Well, you chose correctly. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm going to pick the thing that I enjoy more if it is financially, plausibly viable, and ATP is. So again, thank you to everybody who, supports the show, listens to the show. Thanks to all the members, all that stuff.
ATP.fm/join.
Well, yeah, now it's not going to be me saying it all the time. Now it's going to be John. But no, all snark and jokes aside, it is worth noting once again, especially as we're approaching our 500th episode, that it is because of the shirts that you all buy, the sponsors that you patronize, the memberships that you've purchased. It's because of the time you give us that Marco and me and now John, all three of us now, baby, are lucky enough to do what we do. And I was actually thinking recently that we should take a moment and thank everyone again. And now it's painfully obvious that I need to do exactly that. And even if you aren't a member, that's fine. Even if you're not buying t-shirts, that's fine. Just spending time listening to us means a lot. And telling a friend about us means a lot. And I know and now I can speak for definitely all three of us, that we are so incredibly thankful for every single one of you, no matter how much actual money you send our way. Even if it's zero, it's still awesome. And you know what? Even if the only money you send our way is actually sent to St. Jude in September, that's fine too. We're so thankful and appreciative of every single one of you. And it is I am absolutely gobsmacked that in the course of this show, Marco was already, as previously stated, long unemployable, but in the course of the show, 2/3 of the show are now independent. And I can't think of selfishly anyway, I can't think of a happier outcome from this show. And I'm so incredibly thankful for all of you listening and for the two of you for making this possible for all three of us.
Yeah. I was thinking about when I said, it seems like all my friends are doing this. When I was writing the thing, I'm like, I can't list everybody. I'll just list my podcast. Every single person I podcast with is essentially self-employed. Merlin, you, Jason, right? So I was the odd one out of still being the sucker going into the regular job all the time, right? It just felt like time for me to join the club.
I am so excited, John. Congratulations. This is such incredibly good news.
You know what I hope happens, and I think it will probably before too long, on an infinite timescale for sure. At some point, we're going to hear about some kind of new corporate speak, and John's not going to know it.
Oh, that would be amazing. Oh, that would be so good.
We'll see. It could happen. I have to admit that, I hear Merlin use his corporate speak from when he had a job or whatever. It does change a surprising amount, and if you're not actually forced to be exposed to it, I eventually, probably won't know about it. We'll see. But then who on the show will bring that language in, though? Because if I'm not, none of us can bring it, so it'd have to come from the outside somehow.
Maybe we don't need it.
maybe we don't need it.
We don't need any parking lots or kimonos here. We can just leave that in the parking lot and just move right on to our action items.
So even you're just quoting stuff that Merlin says, which is now out of fashion and out of date.
Because how would I know it if I didn't hear about it from you or Merlin? And he doesn't. Yeah. Where would I learn this from?
But there's like I said, there's so much of it that I don't bring to the show because you don't want to hear it. It's just it's so weird how you don't notice it until you speak with other people and realize no one else uses these phrases, but you start hearing it constantly at work. It comes through the work environment like a wave, like it just ripples through, and it's really invisible unless you start thinking about it.
You'll hear it from Tina, I'm quite sure. So I'm sure you'll hear it. And many thanks for me. I'm sure you, John, more than anyone. Many thanks to Tina for taking this leap with you, because that is a big ask, especially with the financial burden.
Yeah, that's why we talked about it for multiple years.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And with the financial burden of college looming, that is a big ask.
This is how much college will cost for Maggie. I'm gonna make some suggestions all day long, because now Marco, at least one person in the show will get them.
Well, John, I could talk to you about this for years, but we should probably pick a title and move on.
Save questions. If you have questions about it, we can talk about it in future shows or whatever. But I would encourage you to read the post and listen to directives, and maybe they'll answer all your questions. Then you'll be done with it.
We won't be done with it.
We won't be done with it. All kidding aside, is there anything that you would like to plug other than the obvious atp.fm/join and things of that nature, and your two other shows, Robot or Not, and Reconcilable Differences? Is there anything else you would like to plug while we're thinking of it?
No, I mean, if and when I have new things, I'll probably talk about them here. But that's baby steps. We'll get there.
I'm really curious to see, like, because you've been a programmer your entire life since you were a baby. You've been a programmer, and now you're gonna have that angle of yourself just be removed for a while, and so I know you're gonna keep coding because you will have to.
Why I got 2 Mac apps to support.
Right. Well, but you probably don't have a lot of ongoing needs for those. Mm-hmm. So I hope and I bet that one thing you're gonna do is more apps.
Maybe. I mean, there's lots of things that are now on the table. It depends. It depends on how things go. I'm still weighing options and thinking about things. Like right now, I'm still kind of in the mode of like, it's nice to have options. It's nice to not have everything constantly be closed off. And I really need to evaluate those options. And because I haven't spent a lot of time in that mode where I can consider all sorts of different things, right? And, setting aside work stuff, there's like, spending more time with my kids before they disappear to go off to college, right? Or other sort of family things that I haven't had time to do before, right? My priorities are definitely shifting around to not be like, well, now let me fill every second of my life with work to make up for the work I just removed from it. That's probably not what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I have very strong opinions about this that we should talk about sometime. It's funny to me as you say that, it occurred to me that my driving impetus for going independent was wanting to be around for Declan and Michaela while they're young and before they go off to school, as in elementary school. And so I felt like my clock was ticking because, that they were going to be gone all day in elementary school. And, well, kindergarten, that wasn't the case for Declan because he was here on an iPad because pandemic, but you get the idea. Well, with you, it's the same thing, but on the flip side. Alex is not that far away from college, and the clock is ticking for you too, just on the other end of it, which is totally wild and funny.
Yeah, they don't just go away for the day and come back. They go away and don't come back.
Yeah. Golly. Oh, John, I'm so happy. I'm so excited. I'm mad at you for not having told us, but I'm so excited. I'm so incredibly happy.
I'm so happy that you just dropped this like a bomb the way you do. Like this was the most John way you could have possibly told us this.
It took a lot of coordination to keep the secret for the 2 weeks since we recorded Rectives or whatever it was.
Oh, goodness. I am so excited. Well, congratulations, John. This is fantastic news. And let me say just one more time, atp.fm/join.
I think it's still you constantly plugging that, Casey. I was just thanking the people who had already been members. Just everyone who's already a member, just stay a member, and I will continue to be able to pay my mortgage.
John, if you would like a plug-in to put the membership numbers on your menu bar, I know a guy.
No thanks. I don't need to see how much CPU is being used at every second, and I certainly don't need to have that on my menu bar either.
Well, I can give you new things to stress about if you need them. Don't you worry.